Hello everyone, you're listening to Sleepwalker Radio. If our stories help you sleep or relax, please like, comment, and subscribe. Now close your eyes, and let's begin. In the late 80s, I was in my early 20s. Two friends and I decided to go camping in Central Florida for a weekend. Back then, two of us worked for the Park Service, so camping in other state parks was free. We were young and confident and used to being outdoors. I grew up camping with my family on every vacation since I could remember. Every spring, summer, and sometimes winter, my parents would load up the station wagon with tents, sleeping bags, lanterns, and coolers full of food. We would drive to different parks around Florida. Some of my earliest memories are of waking up to the smell of bacon cooking on a Coleman stove and the sound of birds calling from high pine branches. The friend who came along with us but didn't work for the Park Service, this was her first real camping trip. She seemed excited and nervous at the same time. We set up camp in the youth camping area, which was empty that weekend. It was more isolated than the regular family or group campsites. We liked it that way. It meant quiet nights with no loud families or radios or kids screaming, just the sounds of insects and wind and night birds. On the second day, later in the afternoon, we were spread out around camp. My coworker was sitting at the picnic table reading a paperback. My other friend was near the tent writing something in her little leather notebook, and I was out past the edge of camp collecting firewood. We weren't too far from each other, maybe within 50 yards, all within shouting distance. I liked moments like that, when everyone was quiet and doing their own thing, but still together in a silent way. I was carrying small logs and broken branches back to the fire ring, piling them neatly off to the side. While I was out gathering more wood under the tall, thin pines, I kept getting this strange feeling like someone was watching me. I would pause and stand up straight, scanning the woods around me. But there was never anything there. Just the late afternoon sun dropping behind the trees, making long shadows on the dry ground covered in pine needles. I shrugged it off every time and kept working. It wasn't a thick forest there, not like up north. You could see through the pine trunks for a long distance, and the sandy soil and thin grasses didn't hide much. I told myself maybe it was just the leftover thoughts from a scary story my friend read out loud by the fire the night before. But still, it was a weird prickling feeling, like eyes on the back of my neck. When the sun started sinking low, and the sky turned orange then purple, we got the bonfire going. We always built our fires strong and tall, the way my dad taught me, stacking larger logs over smaller ones in a teepee style, so the flames would catch and climb high. The warmth felt good after the long day. We were sitting around it, talking about our jobs, other parks we wanted to visit, and what we wanted to eat for breakfast in the morning. Then a ranger who lived on site about a quarter-mile away drove up in his old Park Service truck. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as he pulled up near the fire ring, tires crunching over pine needles. He hopped out with a grin, wearing his uniform pants, but a regular t-shirt instead of his ranger shirt. In the back of his truck was a load of firewood and a six-pack of beer. He said he saw our fire from his cabin window and thought we could use more wood for the night. He helped us carry it to the pile, and we offered him a chair by the fire. We opened a couple beers and sat with him, telling stories about campers we had dealt with and the dumb things people did in parks. After about an hour, maybe longer, we heard noise way off in the distance. It was faint but clear, voices echoing through the woods, probably from teenagers sneaking onto one of the closed trails. The trails were supposed to be empty after sunset. The ranger sighed and said he'd better go check it out before they caused trouble or got lost in the dark. My coworker offered to go with him, so they took off in his truck, leaving me and the other friend behind at camp. We sat there quietly, just listening to the fire crackle. The woods felt peaceful. The sky was black now, dotted with stars. I leaned back in my folding chair and stared up at them for a while, watching the branches sway and the sparks float up into the sky. The air was still and smelled like pine smoke. I could hear my friend shifting in her chair and the soft sound of her breathing. It was one of those perfect nights where the world feels wide and silent, and your chest feels light with calm. Then, out of nowhere, I felt this cold chill wash over me. It wasn't from the air. The fire was burning hot in front of me, and the breeze was warm. This chill came from inside me somehow, like something reached into my chest with a block of ice. The hair stood up on the back of my neck and arms. My stomach clenched tight. It felt like every nerve in my body was screaming at me to get up and run. I tried to shake it off, forcing myself to breathe normal and stay calm. I kept my eyes on the flames, but I could feel this deep, heavy fear building inside me. My hands felt clammy, and I was gripping the arms of my chair without meaning to. I didn't want to say anything to my friend. I didn't want to scare her for no reason. But after a few minutes, I felt like something was pushing on my chest, like if I didn't move soon I would suffocate from panic. My skin felt electric, and my throat was dry. I turned to look at her, and at that exact moment, she was looking at me. Her eyes were wide, and her face was pale in the firelight. I could see her chest rising and falling quickly, like she had been holding her breath. Without saying a word, we both stood up at the same time. My knees felt weak, and I had to force them to lock straight. We started walking towards the car that was parked a little ways down the sandy path. We didn't run, we just walked fast, trying to act casual, like nothing was wrong. But with each step, I felt like something was right behind me, reaching out to grab the back of my shirt. It was almost unbearable. Halfway there, we glanced at each other again. Her face looked just like how I felt. We broke into a dead run at the same time. I could hear her footsteps pounding the sand behind me. My chest hurt from how hard my heart was beating. I ran straight to the driver's side, and she ran to the passenger side. I yanked the door open so hard it felt like it would break off the hinges, dove in, and slammed it shut. She did the same on her side. I reached over and locked all the doors with trembling fingers, then jammed the keys into the ignition and flicked on the headlights. The beams lit up the clearing in front of us, the pine trunks glowing orange under the light, shadows stretching long and black behind them. I sat there gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt. My friend was sitting completely still, staring straight ahead. I had my pistol in the glove compartment. I pulled it out and set it in my lap. It was just a small revolver I kept for protection. Looking down at it, it felt like a toy. I felt so helpless sitting there in the car with my skin crawling and my chest tight with fear. Whatever was out there felt too big, too strong, too dangerous for any gun to matter. I didn't want to look out the side windows. I was afraid that if I turned my head and looked into the darkness, I would see something I couldn't ever forget, something that would break my mind. So I just kept staring straight ahead into the glare of the headlights, breathing fast, pistol shaking slightly in my lap. The night outside felt like it was pressing against the car windows. It felt like the dark had weight, like it was leaning on the glass trying to get in. I don't know how long we sat there like that. It felt like an hour, but it was probably only a few minutes. Then, just as fast as it came, the feeling left. It was like a heavy fog lifted off our bodies. I could suddenly breathe normal again. My shoulders dropped from where they were tensed up near my ears. My friend let out this long, shaky breath. It felt like whatever was out there had turned around and walked away, back into the deep parts of the forest. I could feel it going, like the pressure inside the car was draining out into the dark. A few minutes after that, the truck headlights swung through the trees as the ranger and my co-worker came back down the path. They parked near us and got out laughing about how the teenagers ran off when they saw the truck coming. They asked why we were in the car with the engine running. I just shook my head and said I thought I saw something and didn't want to take chances. My friend didn't say anything. We got out and went back to the fire, and the ranger tossed another log on top. The flames rose high again, lighting up all our faces. We tried to laugh it off later that night, joking about mountain lions or big bears, though we knew there were no bears in that part of Florida. But the truth was, I've never felt fear like that before or since. I've had guns pulled on me. I've been in situations where I thought I might die. But nothing has ever made me feel so small, so powerless, so deeply terrified that I couldn't even turn my head to look at it. I don't know what it was. Maybe just instinct, maybe a predator out in the dark, maybe a human watching us. I'll never know. But I am sure about one thing. Whatever it was, it meant harm, and it was real. And even now, so many years later, whenever I think back to that night, I can still feel that cold weight pressing down on my chest, warning me to run. That night taught me something important. The woods hold things you can't always see, but you can feel them. Your body knows when you're in danger, even when your mind can't understand it. Sometimes it's better not to look, not to try to see it, just to listen to your fear and get away before it's too late. Because out there in the dark, there are things worse than dying. There are things that will stay with you forever. I've always loved backpacking. The mountains felt like freedom to me. I could walk for days, feeling the sweat drip down my back, feeling my legs burn with every uphill stretch, breathing in air that tasted like pine and dust. I loved the silence that came when the wind died down, that heavy silence where all you heard was your own breath and your boots scuffing dirt and rock. But if there's one thing that has always scared me, even more than bears or getting lost, it's lightning. I learned that lesson for real the first time I went to Philmont in New Mexico. Philmont was supposed to be the best place for any scout to go. I was excited the moment our bus pulled in. The mountains looked dry and sharp, the kind of place that felt ancient. The first few days were hot and clear, the sun burning down on us, sweat drying almost instantly on my shirt. We walked dusty trails, boots sinking into sand and gravel, packs rubbing our shoulders until our shirts had salt rings on them. We made camp one night at a small site near a grove of trees. The evening felt weird because while the sun was still glowing low over the hills, there were dark clouds building behind us. It looked like two skies clashing together, gold and purple. We didn't think much of it. We set up our tents, tied up the bear bags, and sat down on foam pads to cook dinner. The air smelled like dried grass and warm pine needles, mixed with that faint dusty scent that comes right before it rains. We were just eating, passing around the last pot of pasta when it happened. The flash was so fast I didn't even process what it was until the sound hit. A crack that felt like it ripped open the air itself. I jumped so hard the pot flew out of my hands, and dinner went flipping through the air, splattering into the dirt. My ears rang. The tree it hit was about 50 feet away, and when I looked at it, the entire trunk was ripped open. Splinters hung from it like torn skin. The inside of the tree glowed a little with steam. I don't remember breathing for a few seconds. My chest was tight. We all just stared at it. Nobody said a word. I remember thinking how random it was, how it just chose that tree instead of us. We didn't even finish dinner. No one wanted to cook again. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that flash. The rest of that Philmont trip, I was always nervous when dark clouds rolled in. Once, lightning hit another ridge a couple 100 feet away, and the rumble echoed across the valley like a giant's growl. Every single hair on my arms would stand up when storms came. It felt like my body remembered the fear before my brain did. Years later, I was on another backpacking trip, this time in California on the Ray Lakes Loop. It's a beautiful trail. You walk past granite walls that rise up like towers, and the lakes are clear enough to see trout swimming 10 feet down. That day was hard. We'd been climbing passes all day with the sun baking down on us. When we reached camp near a river, my legs felt like they were made of lead. I remember the campsite wasn't my ideal choice. It sat at the bottom of a tight granite canyon, and the river ran right by it. You could see marks high up on the rocks where old floods had carved stains into them. Still, it was a designated National Park Service site, and we were too tired to keep going. We set up camp quickly. The river burbled quietly a few feet away, and the air felt cool on my sweaty skin. That night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up without knowing why. My sleeping bag felt damp from condensation, and my head was pressed against the thin tent floor. Before I could even roll over, a flash of light hit so hard that I could see the tent walls glow red through my closed eyelids. For a split second, I thought the sun had come up, but then the thunder hit. It wasn't just sound. It felt like the ground itself exploded. My chest rattled. I felt my heart jump so hard it hurt. Another flash came, and another thunder crack right after. The storm was right over us. I opened my eyes, and for a second it felt like it was daytime outside. I could see the outlines of trees through the thin nylon. The rain slammed down, sounding like handfuls of gravel thrown onto the tent. I could hear the river roaring louder than before, the water rising fast with runoff. I laid there staring at the ceiling of the tent, my hands gripping the sleeping bag tight. The lightning didn't stop. It was so close that the thunder never even had a chance to die out before the next strike came. Boom, boom, boom. My teeth were chattering. It wasn't from cold. It was like my entire body was vibrating from the sound and fear. I thought, this is how I'm going to die. Either the lightning is going to hit the tree above my tent and fry me, or the river is going to rise up and flood us out before I even have a chance to unzip my sleeping bag. I thought about my family, about how stupid it was to be scared of bears when this was the real killer in the woods. I felt like an ant hiding under a leaf while a giant stomped around above me. At some point I fell asleep again out of exhaustion, but I don't remember how. When morning came, the ground was soggy with water pooling in footprints, and the river had risen several inches overnight. After that trip, I never slept well when I heard thunder rolling in the distance. Even at home, if a storm came at night, I would lie in bed waiting for the ceiling to explode in light. The worst storm of my life happened later, in Switzerland. We were backpacking in the Alps, climbing up a long pass that felt like it would never end. The ground was sharp rock, gray and white with veins of quartz running through it. We were above the tree line, just a wide open rocky field with peaks rising up all around. It was early afternoon when we saw the clouds coming over the peaks, fast and dark, curling over themselves like black smoke. We sped up, trying to get down to a safer area below the pass before it hit, but it was too late. The rain started as a cold mist, then turned into big drops that soaked us instantly. Lightning started hitting around us, bright flashes that lit up the stone ground, followed by crashes that felt like hammer blows to my chest. There was nowhere to go. No trees, no big boulders to hide behind. Just open rocky ground with small low plants. We dropped our packs and squatted down low, trying to be as small as possible, staying apart from each other to reduce the chance of more than one person getting struck. I remember looking at the ground, watching rain bounce off little pebbles, and thinking about how stupid it would be to die there. How stupid it would be to become a small blackened body on that mountain, because I wanted to hike somewhere beautiful. My thighs burned from squatting, but I didn't dare stand up. My breathing came out fast and ragged, the cold air burning in my throat. Every time a flash came, I clenched my teeth, waiting for the pain, for the bright light to turn into burning. It never came. After what felt like forever, the storm rolled further down the valley. We got up, shaking, our packs dripping with rain, and continued down the trail in silence. My knees felt like jelly, and I was so cold I couldn't feel my fingers. Even now, years later, I still love the rain. I love standing on a porch with a tin roof, hearing drops hammer above me while the air smells like fresh wet dirt and grass. I love watching lightning in the distance, seeing it flash across fields or behind tree lines, feeling the thunder roll gently under my feet. But if I'm ever outside when a storm is coming, and there's no roof above me, no solid walls to hide behind, I feel it in my bones. A crawling fear that makes my skin prickle. My breath comes faster. My hands tremble. It's like some part of me that's older than thought screams at me to find shelter, to get away, to curl up somewhere safe where I can watch without being part of it. Because lightning isn't like animals. You can't scare it away with noise. You can't avoid it by hanging your food in a tree. You can't outsmart it or run from it. It just comes, and when it chooses you, there's nothing you can do. That thought stays with me every time I hear thunder in the distance. Every time I see those dark clouds rolling over the mountains. And I don't think I'll ever feel safe under an open sky again if there's lightning in it. I woke up early that morning, before the sun had even started to rise. It was cold in my little camper trailer, and I could see my breath as I moved around gathering my gear for the day. I was out in the bush for the weekend, staying at an old campground near a logging road. The plan was to walk the hills and valleys all day looking for upland birds, mostly grouse and partridge, and be back by sunset to clean whatever I shot and cook up dinner over the small propane stove I kept by the picnic table. I made a quick breakfast, just instant oats and a cup of cheap coffee that I drank while standing outside in the dark. I could hear the wind moving through the big pines around me and the faint sounds of the forest waking up. Chickadees chirping, branches creaking, little rustles in the underbrush as squirrels and chipmunks started their day. I checked my shotgun, slipped a few shells into the loops on my vest, and locked up my trailer. The air smelled of pine needles, cold dirt, and the faint tang of distant wood smoke from another camper's fire. By the time I reached the first ridge, the sun had broken over the horizon, painting everything in gold. I moved slow and careful, keeping my eyes open for any sign of birds. I could hear my boots crunching over frozen grass and fallen needles as I walked. Every few minutes I stopped and listened, scanning the low brush for movement. I flushed a couple of grouse within the first hour, but they flew off before I could get a shot. Still, I wasn't in any rush. I loved days like this. Alone in the woods, crisp, clean air, the quiet of the land stretching out around me. After a few hours, I decided to head towards a different area I had marked on my GPS the day before. It was across a little valley, just a low dip between two ridges covered in thin pines and clumps of aspen. I'd walked it once last year and remembered it being an easy shortcut to the other hunting spot. I started down the trail, feeling a little ache in my knees from the constant climbing and descending. I wasn't tired yet, but I knew by the time I got back to camp I would feel it. As I moved down the trail into the valley, I started to feel that eerie sense of quiet you sometimes get in the woods. The wind had died down, and everything felt still, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I kept going, stepping over some fallen branches, watching my footing as the ground got rockier near the bottom. I was thinking about how the valley might hold birds later in the morning when I saw him. He was standing dead center in the trail about 30 yards ahead of me. At first I thought he was just another hunter, but my eyes focused on the rifle in his hands. It was an AR-15, held at the ready position, barrel pointed slightly down, but his finger was near the trigger guard. Instantly the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was like a switch flipped in my body. I felt the cold rush through my chest, and my breathing went shallow. Everything in me screamed that this was not right. I slowed down, trying to look as calm as I could. My brain was running wild with thoughts. Deer season wasn't open, and even if it was, no one uses an AR-15 to hunt deer around here. It's illegal. The guy didn't look like a normal hunter either. His clothes were dirty and mismatched, old sweatpants tucked into torn boots, a ripped-up camo jacket over what looked like 2 or 3 dirty shirts. His beard was patchy and gray, and his hair stuck out from under a filthy ball cap in greasy clumps. His skin looked sunburned and weather-worn, and I could tell even from that distance he hadn't shaved, showered, or probably even changed his clothes in a long time. My body felt frozen, but I kept walking forward slowly, holding my shotgun with the barrel pointed down and my hands far from the trigger. I wanted to show him I wasn't a threat. Every step felt heavy, like I was walking underwater. The forest around us was dead silent. I stopped about 15 yards away, close enough to see the dirt under his nails as he held the rifle. He wasn't aiming it at me, but it was close enough to ready that it didn't matter. I could see little flecks of dirt or dried blood on his pants. His eyes were bloodshot and half closed, like he was on something or hadn't slept in days. He just stared at me, unblinking. I tried to keep my voice calm and normal. I said that I was just out bird hunting, asked how he was doing. He didn't move or smile. He just stood there breathing heavy through his nose like he was trying to keep himself from doing something. Then he said he was hunting deer. His voice was low and cracked, and the way he said it sent a cold spike down my spine. I knew instantly that he wasn't out here for deer. His body was too thin, his hands were shaking slightly. His whole presence felt off, dangerous in a way that words couldn't fully describe. My mind was racing. I thought about turning and running back up the trail, but I knew he could just shoot me in the back. I thought about raising my shotgun, but there was no way I'd win that fight, even if I got a shot off. So I tried to keep it calm. I asked if he knew where I might find some birds. He paused for what felt like forever, just stared at me with those bloodshot eyes. Then he said I might find some back the way I came. His voice went sharp on those last words, almost like an order. The message was clear. Go back. Leave now. I nodded slowly and backed away a few steps before turning. I kept my head down, but my ears were straining, waiting for the sound of him raising his rifle behind me. Every crunch of my boots on gravel felt deafening. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my fingertips. My mouth was dry and my stomach felt like I was going to puke. I kept walking, forcing myself not to run, not to look back, just moving step after step up out of that valley. The sun was high now, but the trees felt dark around me, like they were closing in. When I finally crested the ridge, I stopped and crouched down behind a thick pine, breathing so hard my chest hurt. I looked back down the trail, but I couldn't see him anymore. I didn't know if he was following me or just standing there. I waited for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, trying to calm my shaking hands enough to hold my shotgun properly again. After a while I started moving again, taking the long way around to the other hunting spot. But my heart wasn't in it anymore. Every shadow felt threatening. Every sound made me jump. I couldn't stop thinking about that guy down there. The way he looked at me like he was trying to decide something, like he didn't care if he lived or died. I walked for a while trying to hunt, but eventually I gave up. My nerves were fried, and I just wanted to be back at camp where I could lock the trailer door and feel a bit safer. When I got back, I sat in my camp chair for a long time staring at the tree line. I kept thinking about what could have been down that trail. A meth lab maybe, or stolen gear, or something even worse. I cooked dinner without tasting it, my hands still shaky as I tried to cut up the vegetables. That night I locked the camper tight, pulled the blinds, and kept my shotgun beside my sleeping bag. Every crack of a branch outside made my heart hammer against my ribs. The next morning I packed up early and drove into town. I stopped at the sheriff's office and told them everything. The deputy wrote it all down, asked a few questions about exactly where I saw him and what he looked like. He nodded a lot, but didn't say much. He said they'd send someone to check it out. I thanked him and walked out feeling hollow. Driving home, I kept seeing his face in my mind. Those flat, dead eyes, the dirt on his hands, the rifle held ready. I don't know what happened after that. Maybe they found him, maybe they didn't. Part of me still wonders if he's out there in those woods right now, wandering the valleys with that gun in his hands, waiting for the next person to come down the trail. All I know is I never went back to that valley again. Even now, years later, just thinking about it makes my chest tighten. I've been hunting my whole life, been deep in the bush, been close to bears and cougars, and all sorts of dangerous animals. But nothing ever scared me the way that man did. Because he wasn't a bear or a cougar. He was a human being. And humans, when they're desperate or broken or sick in the head, can be the most dangerous thing you'll ever meet out there. I never really thought about how dangerous camping could be until a few of these trips happened. Sure, I always knew there were risks, but it never fully hit me until I felt it in my bones, sitting there with my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. It was early summer when I went camping with my wife. We had picked a spot deep in a forest full of jack pine. The sky had been gray all day, but there was no rain in the forecast, so we set up camp as normal. I remember the smell of pine needles and the quiet stillness. We cooked sausages over the fire and drank coffee as the sun went down behind the trees. It was cool out but not cold, and the wind was calm enough that I didn't think twice about the dark clouds moving fast above us. Sometime around midnight, I woke up to the sound of wind. Not a breeze, but a loud, howling wind that made the rain fly on our tent snap like a flag. At first I lay there thinking it would pass. But then the trees started to sway and creak in a way that sounded like 1,000 doors opening all at once. The jack pines were tall and thin, and they bent and snapped back against the wind, making this deep groaning sound that rattled right through my chest. Then I heard a crack. A sharp, loud crack like a rifle shot. I knew right away it wasn't a gun. A tree had just broken in half. I sat up fast and felt the tent shifting under the wind. My wife was breathing heavy, awake too. I could feel the ground vibrating as the tree fell somewhere close, maybe 30 or 40 feet away. When it hit the ground, it sounded like a car crash. The wind kept roaring. I could hear branches breaking and pine cones hitting the ground like little bombs. Another tree cracked and fell. I thought about getting out of the tent and finding an open area, but when I unzipped the door, the wind almost tore it from my hands. The trees were bending so far I could see the trunks twisting under the force. I imagined one of them falling right onto our tent, crushing us before we even knew it. I grabbed our boots and raincoats and we crawled out. The wind pushed against my chest so hard it felt like a wave. My eyes were full of dirt and pine needles. We ran to a small clearing about 20 feet away, stumbling over roots and rocks, branches slapping against our arms and faces. We stood there with the wind tearing at our coats and watched as the trees bent over us, the tops swaying like grass in a field. I could hear branches breaking off and crashing down. Every time I heard a crack, I flinched, waiting to feel the weight of it smash into my skull. We stood there in that clearing, shivering, my hands shaking, my wife pressed against my side. The wind roared so loud we couldn't hear anything else. I could feel it pulling at my hood, trying to tear it away. I just kept looking up at the trees, waiting to see one snap and fall toward us. Finally, after what felt like forever, the wind started to calm. The trees still swayed, but they stopped cracking. The sound softened to a dull roar, and then just a breeze. I could hear my own breathing again, ragged and shaky. We stood there in the dark, lit only by my headlamp, and looked around at the mess. Pine needles covered everything. Branches lay scattered across the clearing. Our tent was half flattened, held up only by one bent pole. We spent the rest of the night sitting on a log in that clearing, listening to the trees creak in the breeze. As soon as dawn came, we packed up what we could and left. I didn't feel safe until we were driving down the gravel road, away from the jack pines and their twisted shadows. But that wasn't the only time I felt that deep, crawling fear while camping. Another time I went out with my best friend to a semi-remote campsite. It was the kind of place only people with 4x4s could reach, and even then it was rough. The dirt road and was covered in ruts and loose rock. The campsite itself wasn't really a campground, just a clearing with a couple of old rusty fire pits, 2 rotten picnic tables falling apart, and 2 rundown outhouses. Parks probably only checked it once or twice a year. We pulled in late in the afternoon. The sun was still up but low enough that everything had a golden glow. We set up our tents and started gathering firewood. My friend wandered over to the outhouses to check them out. He opened the door to the first one and stood there for a second, just staring. Then he shut it and walked over to the second one, went in, came back out, and walked back to me. I could tell something was off about how quiet he was, but I didn't ask. I just kept stacking firewood. A few minutes later, he looked at me and nodded toward the outhouse. I figured an animal had gotten in and died, or maybe someone shit on the floor. But when I walked over and opened the door, the smell wasn't bad. It was just musty like old wood. Then I saw them. 3 full backpacks, lined up on the floor. Big backpacks, the kind I used for week-long backcountry trips. I stared at them for a while, wondering if someone was coming back for them. But curiosity got the better of me. I unzipped the first bag. Inside was a sleeping bag, camping stove, fuel canister, and some freeze-dried meals. All good quality gear. I opened the second bag. Same thing. Tent, sleeping pad, clothes, food. Normal stuff. Then I opened the third bag. At first I thought it was just stuffed with clothes because of how packed it was. But then I saw the colors. Skittles. Every kind. Big bulk bags, small share bags, regular red bags, tropical bags, sour bags. Just packed full from top to bottom with Skittles. I stood there for a minute trying to make sense of it. Who packs 80 liters of Skittles into a backpack and leaves it in an outhouse in the middle of nowhere? My friend walked over and peeked in. We didn't say anything. We just stood there, staring at that pile of candy. We camped there for 4 days. Never saw another person. No cars, no hikers, nothing. Every morning I walked past the outhouse to get water, and the backpacks were still there. Every night when I went to brush my teeth, they were still there. When we left, we stopped at the ranger station and told them about it. They wrote it down and thanked us. That was it. I still think about it sometimes, laying in bed at night, wondering who left those bags there and why someone needed that many Skittles. But probably the scariest time was when I took my dog out for a solo overnight trip. It was a last-minute plan. I just threw my tarp, sleeping bag, and a bit of food into my pack and drove out. I parked on an old logging road and hiked in about 2 miles to a little creek I liked. I set up my tarp between 2 trees and built a small fire just to boil water and keep warm. It was quiet. My dog curled up by my feet, and I watched the sky turn dark through the trees. I wasn't hiding, but I wasn't exactly camping right on the trail either. Just far enough in to feel alone. I was dozing off when I heard a rumble in the distance. Then I heard a truck engine, loud and rough, coming fast down a dirt road somewhere nearby. I could hear the tires crunching over rocks. Then it stopped. The engine cut, and everything went quiet for a moment. Then I heard voices. Loud, slurred shouting. Laughing. The kind of drunk shouting that never ends well. I heard a bottle smash against something metal. Then the gunshot started. Loud cracks echoing through the trees, each shot followed by shouting and laughter. My stomach dropped. I realized I must have camped closer to another old road than I thought. They probably didn't know I was there, but I knew the lay of the land, and I was almost certain they were shooting in my direction. I felt the cold weight of fear settle into my chest. I grabbed my dog's leash and clipped it on tight. I stuffed my sleeping bag into my pack as fast as I could. I left the tarp, left the fire burning down to coals. I just wanted to get out. The shots kept coming, echoing through the trees, making it impossible to tell how far away they really were. I could feel the vibration of each shot under my boots as we moved. My dog stayed close to my leg, his ears pinned back, tail tucked tight. I kept one hand on his collar, gripping hard every time a shot cracked through the forest. We hiked back to the truck in the dark, my headlamp bouncing against the trees, every shadow looking like someone standing there with a gun. My mouth was so dry it hurt to swallow. My shoulders ached from clenching them. I kept listening for footsteps or voices, but all I heard was my own breathing and the shots fading away in the distance. When we got to the truck, I threw my bag into the back seat, and my dog jumped in after me. I sat there for a few minutes with the engine running, headlights cutting through the dark, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I didn't drive away until I stopped shaking. That night when I got home, I sat on the porch for a long time, just listening to the quiet hum of the town. No wind shaking trees, no drunk guys shooting guns, no backpacks full of Skittles and outhouses. Just the sound of cars on the highway in the distance, and the soft thump of my dog laying down next to me, tired but safe. All those trips taught me something I never learned from reading gear reviews or watching survival shows. That real fear isn't about being alone in the dark, or seeing something creepy, or getting lost. Real fear is feeling how thin your own safety really is. How close the world can come crashing down on you at any moment. A tree falling on your tent. A bullet flying through the trees. The sharp edge of a quiet mystery that you will never understand. It makes you realize that no matter how strong you think you are, nature and people will always be stronger. And that's the scariest thing of all. I remember that winter night, so clearly even though years have passed. The air was cold in that sharp way that makes your nostrils sting with each breath, but it felt normal for us. Camping was something we did almost every weekend. Living in a small rural town surrounded by mountains and forests, it felt like we belonged out there under the stars, with the cold earth under us and the smell of pine needles filling every breath. We were a group of friends, all somewhere between 16 and 19, who spent most days after school fishing, hiking, hunting, or just sitting around fires in silence. That weekend we had planned a simple trip by the river, nothing big, just a one-night campout to fish and hang out. We hiked in during the late afternoon while there was still plenty of light, carrying our rods, packs, and a single tent we all planned to cram into like sardines. That was always the plan, even if it meant stiff necks and sore backs the next day. We didn't care. We just wanted to be out there. But when me and one of my close friends saw how the river curved off downstream about a mile away, we knew that spot would be better for fishing. The sun was dropping behind the ridge when we decided to break off from the rest of the group. We told them we'd meet back up in the morning, packed what little we needed, and headed down the narrow deer trail along the riverbank. I remember walking ahead, pushing through thin branches that scraped my coat, hearing the crunch of frost beneath my boots. My friend followed behind, quiet like always. He was the type who never spoke unless there was something worth saying. By the time we reached the spot, the sun had fully disappeared behind the trees, and that bluish darkness settled over everything. The river there widened into a slow, deep pool with a gravel bar along the side. Behind it, the forest pulled back into a small clearing that ended with a massive boulder, maybe 15 feet tall, half covered in patches of frozen moss. It looked like a silent giant crouched in the trees. We decided to build a quick lean-to against it, instead of carrying the tent that far. We gathered thick sticks, wedged them between cracks in the boulder, and leaned them down into the frozen dirt, covering the whole thing with a tarp we kept in the bottom of his pack. It wasn't perfect, but it blocked the wind. We got a fire going just a few feet away. I remember squatting down, striking the flint again and again until the sparks caught onto the birch bark. The flames spread quick, and soon we had a small fire crackling, giving off enough heat to let us peel off our gloves for a while. We ate some jerky, sipped water, and just sat there listening to the river. You could hear it gurgling slow and deep, echoing off the boulder behind us. The forest was quiet except for the occasional creaking of tree trunks shifting in the cold. When it got late, we laid our sleeping bags out inside the lean-to. My friend drifted off fast, breathing heavy and deep within minutes. But I couldn't sleep. I just laid there staring out into the darkness beyond the fire. Something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just off, like the way you feel when you know someone's looking at you from behind. I sat up and listened hard, trying to hear over my friend's breathing. I could hear the wind passing through the trees above us, the river rolling on, but there was nothing else. Still, the feeling didn't leave. I thought about mountain lions. I'd seen them before out there, once crossing the logging road at dusk, and another time perched on a rock across the river watching us fish. They didn't scare me. Not like this. They were predators, sure, but if you understood them, you knew they weren't reckless. They stalked, they waited, and if you made yourself known, they usually left. Still, to be safe, I threw a couple more logs on the fire. Sparks burst up into the night, and the new flames pushed back the darkness another few feet. I sat there staring at the flames, listening to the pops and crackles, feeling the heat on my numb cheeks. After a while, I lifted my head to look around, and that's when I saw him. There, under the pale light of the full moon, was a man standing at the edge of the clearing. He was about 80 yards away, right where the trees started up again. The moon was bright enough that night to see his shape clearly. He stood still, not moving at all, just a dark shape with the faint outline of arms, legs, and head. I couldn't see his face, just the shape of him in the moonlight. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes with my knuckles, but he was still there. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't take a full breath. I couldn't move. I couldn't wake my friend. I just sat there frozen, staring at him, feeling the blood rush in my ears, so loud it almost drowned out the sound of the river. The fire crackled between us, throwing off light and shadows, but the moon lit him up from behind, so I couldn't make out what he wore. I just knew he was staring back at me. I felt it like a weight pressing against my chest. He stood there for maybe a minute, maybe two. It felt like forever. I kept thinking I should say something, call out, wave, anything. But my voice wouldn't come. My body wouldn't move. My hand hovered near my friend's bag, where he kept his .357. I didn't grab it right away. I just stared, feeling every hair on my arms standing up under my coat. Then, without any warning, the man turned. He didn't move fast or rush away. He just turned slowly and walked off into the trees, away from us, deeper into the forest where the moonlight couldn't reach. I watched until I couldn't see him anymore. My legs felt like water, shaking so bad I thought I might throw up. I finally reached over and grabbed the .357 from my friend's bag. It felt heavy and cold in my hand. I flicked the cylinder open and saw the shine of brass rounds. I closed it, thumbed back the hammer just to hear that heavy click, then let it down carefully. My friend kept sleeping, breathing slow and steady, completely unaware. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat there on the ground, leaning against the boulder with the gun resting on my thigh, staring out at the dark tree line where I last saw him. I kept the fire going all night, adding wood whenever it burned low, watching the sparks drift up and disappear into the black sky. The moon arced overhead, casting that cold white glow over the clearing until it finally dropped behind the ridge, and everything went dark again except for the glow of the coals. My mind ran wild with possibilities. Who was he? Why was he out there in the middle of the forest on a winter night? Maybe he was just another camper or a hunter passing through. But why stand there silently like that, watching two kids by a fire and then walk away without a word or a gesture? I thought about every possibility over and over, trying to come up with something that felt normal. But nothing felt normal about it. When dawn finally came, the first light creeping over the mountains, I felt like I could finally breathe again. My friend woke up, rubbing his eyes and asking if I slept at all. I didn't tell him everything. I just said I stayed up to keep the fire going. We packed our gear quietly, and I kept glancing over at the edge of the clearing where he had stood. There were no footprints in the frosted grass when we walked over, but I didn't really expect to see any. It had been too far away, and the frost was thin. We made our way back up to the main camp where the others were still asleep in their cramped tent, zipped up tight against the morning chill. We cooked breakfast together, joked around, and fished for a few hours before heading home. But I couldn't shake what I saw. Even when we were back in town sitting at the diner drinking cheap coffee, I kept thinking about him standing there, silent, unmoving, watching. I think about it even now. I've been back to that spot dozens of times since. I've camped there alone and with friends. I've sat by that same boulder, feeling the fire's warmth against my face while the shadows moved just outside the light. But I've never seen him again. Part of me wonders if he was just a lost hiker trying to figure out where he was. Another part of me thinks he was out there for a reason, and seeing two kids alone by a fire changed whatever he planned to do. Maybe he was just passing through. Maybe he was looking for something. I'll never know. I've thought about what I'd do if it happened again. Now that I'm older, I think I would stand up, call out, ask if he needed help or directions, but back then, at 16, I was frozen with fear. The truth is, we like to think the forests and mountains are empty at night, that we're alone out there with only the animals and trees. But sometimes there are others out there too. People with their own reasons for walking silently through the darkness. And when I sit by a fire now, watching the trees beyond the light, I always wonder who might be standing out there, just far enough away to blend into the shadows, watching me while I stare into the flames. I never liked sleeping outside alone. Even as a kid, I always wanted to be near someone, near a light or a sound that reminded me I wasn't alone in the dark. When I joined Boy Scouts, I knew we'd be doing all sorts of camping trips, but I didn't think it would be like this. I remember the day we arrived at the week-long campout. It was summer, but the mornings were still cold. We set up our main camp, big canvas tents lined up in neat rows, the smell of pine needles underfoot mixing with the smoke from the campfires. Every morning started early with the bugle. We'd get up, brush our teeth at the trough sink that ran along the edge of the trees, eat eggs and bacon or cereal from metal trays, then start our merit badge classes. I signed up for wilderness survival because I thought it sounded impressive. I wanted that badge sewn on my sash. I thought it would feel good, like I could survive anywhere, like I could walk off into the forest with nothing but a knife and figure it out. The first couple of days were simple enough. We learned how to identify edible plants, how to boil water to make it safe, how to tie strong knots to build shelters. Our instructor was this older scoutmaster who had done everything twice. He talked about living off the land, about spending nights under the stars, about being in the mountains of Colorado with nothing but a tarp and his will to live. He spoke with a slow drawl that made him sound wise. Every word sank in deep for me. On the fourth day, he told us about the overnight requirement. To earn the badge, we had to build a makeshift shelter from natural materials, set up a safe place to sleep, and stay out there alone or with a small group away from base camp. We all had to do it. It was part of the badge. I felt my chest tighten a little. I remember stirring the rocks around with my boot while he talked, pretending to act casual, but inside my stomach was churning. The idea of sleeping far from camp, in the dark, without any real tent or cot or light except my flashlight, made me feel cold in my bones. The day came fast. After lunch, we packed our gear. We were only allowed a sleeping bag, knife, water bottle, a bit of rope, and a plastic tarp. No tents, no foam pads. We hiked out in single file, about 2.5 miles from the main camp. The dirt trail turned narrow, weaving between tall pine trees and patches of dead branches. The sun came through the canopy in flickers. Every now and then, I'd see birds dart across the trail, flashes of gray and white, or hear the distant call of a crow echoing through the forest. My pack was light, but it felt heavy because of the way my chest felt. Like my heart was an extra stone in my body, weighing down each step. Finally, the scoutmaster stopped and told us to spread out. The 8 of us walked in different directions, finding spots far enough from each other to build our own shelters, but close enough that he could check on us before leaving. I found a small clearing between 2 thick trees with low branches. The ground was dry and covered in pine needles. I dropped my gear and took a deep breath, trying to calm the buzzing in my head. I started gathering long branches, snapping off dead limbs, finding Y-shaped sticks to prop up my tarp. It took me over an hour to get it right. I tied the rope between the trees, threw the tarp over it, angled it down, and weighed down the edges with rocks and logs. When I crawled under it, it felt small and tight. The smell of sap and dirt filled the air around me. At least it was built. That felt like something. Before sunset, the scoutmaster walked by each shelter to check our work. He nodded at mine, told me it looked solid, and moved on. The sun dipped lower behind the trees, and the air turned colder. I sat there, eating a granola bar and sipping water, staring at the growing darkness around me. I could hear the other boys moving around in their shelters, coughing, unzipping sleeping bags, sighing. The forest got quiet fast after sunset. The sounds of the day, birds, rustling leaves, insects, faded into a deeper stillness. Every now and then a twig snapped in the distance, and I felt my shoulders jump. When it got fully dark, I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the tarp just inches above my face. My flashlight was off to save batteries, but I kept it right by my hand. I could hear my own breathing loud in my ears. The smell of pine needles mixed with the cold dampness rising from the ground. My heart wouldn't slow down. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear something, a faint crunch of leaves, the sigh of the wind in the trees, and I'd snap them open again, expecting to see something peering in at me from the dark. I lay like that for what felt like hours, my eyes wide, my body stiff in my sleeping bag. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke up suddenly to the sound of someone yelling. It wasn't a loud yell, but it was desperate. From somewhere to my left, in the darkness, I heard, "No, please get away, stop, don't." Then silence. Cold silence. My heart was thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My whole body went stiff. I was staring into the darkness under my tarp, my eyes straining to see anything outside. My mouth felt dry, my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I lay there for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds, just listening. There was nothing. No movement. No voices. Nothing. I whispered as loud as I could without actually shouting, "Hey," trying to get a response. But there was nothing. No one else stirred. No rustling from the other shelters. Just quiet. My mind was spinning, thinking maybe someone was getting attacked. Maybe there was an animal. Maybe there was a man in the woods grabbing kids in their sleep. My body was frozen. I wanted to get up. I wanted to run. But my sleeping bag felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I just lay there, staring into the dark, ears straining for any sound. My breath was shaking in my chest. Then I started thinking about what could happen. About how far we were from base camp. About how the scoutmaster was long gone back to his own tent at camp. About how if something happened, no one would know until morning. I imagined footsteps crunching closer and closer. Imagined someone reaching into my shelter and grabbing my sleeping bag and dragging me out into the trees. I lay there, eyes burning, not blinking, muscles tense like a coiled spring. After a few minutes, I realized I could hear slow breathing coming from the same direction as the voice. Slow, deep breathing, steady and calm. That's when it clicked in my brain. He was sleep-talking. It was just one of the boys having a nightmare. The words were so desperate and real that it sounded like he was awake, but it was just sleep-talking. I felt a rush of relief wash over me so strong that I almost started crying. My eyes burned with tears I didn't let fall. My hands were shaking. My whole body felt weak, like I'd been holding up a huge weight and finally put it down. But then a new thought crept in. Why didn't anyone else wake up? Why was I the only one awake to hear that? There were 7 other boys out here plus me. How could they all sleep through it? The words were so clear, so desperate. I lay there thinking about that for a long time. Every now and then, I'd hear a shifting sound, someone moving in their sleep, or a small sigh drifting through the trees. The night stretched on, long and silent. I didn't sleep again. I just lay there in my sleeping bag, listening to the darkness, feeling the cold ground press up against my back through the thin tarp floor. Around 5 in the morning, the sky started turning gray. The first bird calls came, quiet at first and then growing louder. The chill settled deep in my bones. My fingers were numb. My face felt stiff with cold air. I crawled out of my shelter when I saw the scoutmaster walking down the trail toward us. He called out softly, telling us to start packing up. One by one, boys climbed out of their shelters, stretching, yawning, their breath puffing in the cold morning air. I looked over at the boy who had yelled in his sleep. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, but he didn't say anything about the night. None of the others said they heard anything strange. We packed up our sleeping bags and tarps in silence. My fingers fumbled with the knots in the rope, too cold and stiff to move easily. As we hiked back toward base camp, the sun rose behind us, turning the sky orange and pink through the tall pine trunks. Back at camp, we had breakfast and started our day like normal. No one talked about the night. No one acted like anything strange had happened. But the whole time I kept thinking about how alone I felt out there, lying in the darkness, frozen with fear, thinking someone was about to die, thinking maybe it would be me. Even now, years later, I still think about that night sometimes when I'm lying in bed trying to sleep. I think about the way my heart felt like it was going to burst, the way my ears strained for any little sound, the way the darkness felt like it was pressing down on me. I think about how no one else heard it, how I was the only one awake in that silent forest, hearing the desperate voice of a boy lost in his nightmare. It reminds me that fear doesn't need anything real to hold on to. Sometimes it just needs the dark and your own mind to grow into something that feels too big to survive. And that's the scariest part of all. We had planned the trip for weeks. It was early spring, just before the real Arizona heat would roll in, and we wanted to take advantage of the cool nights. There were about 8 of us, all in our mid-20s, craving some dirt under our nails, burnt hot dogs, and the quiet you only find in the middle of nowhere. We drove out past Tucson, off a dirt road that split off another dirt road, until the GPS stopped working, and we just kept going until the trucks shook so bad over the rocks that we decided to set up camp right there. The day had been perfect. We set up our tents in a rough circle, the trucks parked around us like a wall. We chopped wood, drank beer, and cooked dinner as the sky shifted from bright blue to deep orange and then dark purple. I remember feeling so at peace, sitting on my camp chair watching the fire, listening to the guys tell stories about stupid stuff we'd done in high school. I crawled into my tent that night with 2 other friends, zipped into my sleeping bag, and fell asleep to the sound of someone snoring and the wind brushing against the nylon. Sometime later, it was still dark. I woke up because I heard something. At first, it was so quiet I thought I was dreaming. I lay still, staring at the top of the tent, listening to my own breath. Then I heard it again. This slow, careful sniffing sound, like a dog but deeper. My chest tightened. I could feel my friends on either side of me start to shift slightly. That tiny movement you make when you're awake, but don't want to alert anyone. We didn't say a word to each other, but we all knew we were awake. I could feel the fear moving through the tent like static. My first thought was that it was a bear or maybe a coyote. I remembered instantly that I hadn't checked if the guys had tied up the garbage bags or put the leftover food back in the trucks. I cursed them in my head, thinking it was typical. They'd laugh in the morning and say it was just a raccoon or something. But the sniffing moved. It slid slowly along the side of our tent, pausing every few seconds, then continued towards the tent next to ours. I could hear the crunch of the ground under its feet. Heavy feet. I could hear its breathing too, wet and close to the thin nylon walls. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it could hear me. My mouth was dry, and I tried to swallow as quietly as I could. I imagined claws ripping through the tent, teeth clamping down on my leg or arm, dragging me out screaming while everyone else sat frozen in their tents. Suddenly there was a flurry of noise. Someone unzipped a tent, and there was shouting and stomping. I heard one of the guys yell, and saw light flash through our tent walls. There was a banging sound too, like someone hitting something metal. My first instinct was relief. I thought, finally, they're scaring off whatever animal was outside. I didn't move, just lay there waiting to hear the sounds of retreating paws thudding away into the desert. But it wasn't that. I heard someone running. Fast steps across the dirt and gravel. Then another guy shouted something about it being a person. I felt my stomach twist into a knot. A person. I didn't understand at first. Who would be out here, sniffing tents in the middle of the night? I stayed still for a long time, even after the noise died down. I didn't want to move or speak. I could hear my friends breathing next to me, shallow and fast. Eventually, we all crawled out. One guy had his gun out, checking the tree line with his flashlight. Another was standing by the coolers which had been rummaged through and left open. Some food was missing. Our friend who scared him off told us he'd stepped out of his tent to pee when he saw the figure crouched by the coolers, going through bags, sniffing them, sniffing around like an animal would. When he shouted, the man, because it was a man, had turned and looked at him, then dropped everything and ran into the dark. We packed up immediately. No one wanted to stay after that. We didn't even speak while packing, just moved quickly in the dark with our headlamps bobbing. I remember the noise of the tent zippers, the crunch of boots on gravel, the smell of cold ashes from the fire pit. We drove out as the first hints of dawn were showing in the east. Everyone was quiet. My body felt tight, my head heavy from lack of sleep and fear. We didn't talk about it much afterwards. It was one of those things that stays in your head, but you try not to think about. You tell people about it at bars, make jokes about meth heads in the desert, but deep down it makes your skin crawl. The idea of someone out there watching us sleep, sniffing our tents, breathing just inches away from where we lay helpless. A year later, we went back. We were stupid. We thought it was a one-time thing, just a random creep passing through. This time, we decided not to use tents. We thought we were so clever. We parked the trucks in a tight semicircle, and everyone slept in the beds of their trucks or in the back of their SUVs. I remember sitting by the fire that night, watching the flames flicker off the metal sides of the trucks, thinking how safe we were this time. We laughed about the last trip, about the sniffer man, trying to make light of it. I fell asleep in the back of my SUV with my girlfriend. The seats were folded down, and we had laid out blankets and pillows, and I remember thinking how comfortable it was compared to a sleeping pad on dirt. I slept deeply at first, until something woke me up. It was a bright light shining right on my face through the window. It wasn't the moon. It wasn't a lantern. It was a flashlight, held by someone standing right outside. I didn't move. I knew instantly not to move. I kept my breathing steady and let my eyes stay mostly closed. My girlfriend was turned away from the window, facing me, and I hoped she stayed asleep or pretended to. I felt cold all over. My ears were filled with blood and noise from my racing pulse. The light stayed on my face for what felt like forever, then slowly moved away. I listened. I heard the gravel crunch softly as the person walked to the next truck. I wanted to sit up and look, but I forced myself to stay still. I only moved my eyes, peeking out through a small slit in my eyelids. I could see the shape of a man standing next to my friend's truck, his flashlight moving over the bed where two of my friends were asleep in sleeping bags. He didn't move like he was checking to see if we were okay. He just stood there, watching them sleep. The light hovered over their faces, then their bodies, then back to their faces. I couldn't take it. As soon as the light moved away, and he started walking towards the trees at the edge of the clearing, I sat up. My heart was slamming in my chest. I shook my girlfriend's shoulder and whispered her name. She turned over quickly, eyes wide and terrified. She had been awake the whole time. I crawled out of the SUV as quietly as I could and ran to the other trucks, shaking my friends awake one by one. Most of them were already awake, pretending to sleep just like I had. We all gathered by the fire pit, no one saying a word. We just stood there, listening, watching the darkness around us, trying to hear if he was still close. The fire was dead, just cold coals and ash. The moon was bright enough to see each other's faces. Everyone looked pale, eyes wide, lips pressed together in thin lines. Eventually someone said we needed to go. We packed up in record time, tossing bags into truck beds, rolling sleeping bags without folding them, slamming tailgates shut. Engines started up, headlights cutting through the desert. We left that campsite behind, dust swirling up in our mirrors. I've never been so happy to see a main road as I was that morning. The sun was just coming up over the flat land, turning the sky bright orange and pink. No one said a word on the drive back. My girlfriend held my hand so tight my fingers went numb. We still go camping sometimes, but never out there. Never that far out where there's no one else around. I think about that man often. I wonder what he wanted. I wonder if he was just sick in the head, living out there in the scrub and rocks, or if he followed us from somewhere. The way he sniffed the tents that first time still makes my stomach twist. That low, careful sniff, like he was trying to breathe us in, remember what we smelled like. Now when I sleep outside, I wake up at every sound. Every little noise makes me think someone is walking up to my tent or car window. Makes me wonder if they're going to stand there for hours, watching me, breathing quietly, just inches away from my sleeping face. Makes me wonder what would have happened if any of us had actually woken up and confronted him. Or worse, if none of us ever woke up at all. We never camped in that area again, and I don't think I ever will. I still think about that night sometimes, even though so many years have passed since it happened. Back then I was about 14 or 15, and my family used to camp at the same state park almost every summer. It became a tradition for us. We would pull up in our old van, unpack all the gear, and set up the tents near the edge of the woods. The campground wasn't anything special. Just a few dirt paths, picnic tables, and a small bathroom building with showers that never seemed clean enough. But I loved it. I felt calm out there, like nothing from home could bother me. My friend came with us that year, like he did most summers. He was the only one I really hung out with back then. We spent the days swimming in the lake, fishing off the dock, walking to the little store near the entrance for sodas, and messing around in the woods behind our tent. At night, though, that was when we really felt alive. Every evening after dinner, after the sun set and the air turned cooler, we would wait for everyone else to fall asleep. Then we would slip out of the tent quietly, trying not to wake my parents or my younger siblings. We called it the ritual. It wasn't anything official or spiritual, just our own thing. We called it that to make it sound cooler. All it really meant was that every night we walked into the woods in the dark, trying to see how far we could go without freaking ourselves out. We always carried flashlights. They were the cheap plastic kind with the big square batteries inside that rattled when you shook them. We never turned them on at first. That was the point. We liked feeling the darkness press in around us, the way the trees seemed to close off the path behind us. The only light came from the stars, or the thin moon if it wasn't hidden behind the clouds. I remember how we would walk side by side, sometimes brushing against low pine branches or tripping over fallen logs. It felt like we were the only people left in the world. Our footsteps were soft on the pine needles and dirt, and every time a cricket or bird chirped nearby, we froze for a second to listen. That particular night felt colder than usual. The air smelled like damp leaves, and the faint smoke from all the campfires spread around the park. We'd eaten hot dogs earlier, and I could still taste them when I burped as we walked. My friend was telling me about this video game he wanted to buy when we got home, something about zombies and shotguns. I remember barely listening because I kept looking up at the gaps in the trees, watching the dark sky shift as we moved forward. We decided to go further than we ever had before. Usually, we stayed close enough that if we turned around, we could see the faint glow of the campground lights through the trees. This time we kept walking until the glow was gone, and all we had was blackness around us. We didn't say anything about it, but I could tell we were both starting to feel uneasy. It was like the air itself felt thicker, colder. The silence got deeper the further we went, almost like the world was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a faint sound behind us, like someone whispering. I thought it was just the wind at first, pushing through the leaves, but it didn't sound like wind. It sounded like a voice, quiet and broken up into little pieces. I stopped walking and turned to look behind us. It was too dark to see anything, so I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the black and lit up the trees and bushes we had just passed. I swept it back and forth, moving it slowly to catch anything that might have been there. Nothing, just the trunks of trees, pale in the light, and the thick bushes along the ground. My friend turned on his flashlight too, and for a minute we just stood there, shining our lights around us, listening. The whispering had stopped. I felt my heartbeat in my chest, deep and steady but heavy too, like my body was warning me about something I couldn't see. We turned off the flashlights and kept walking. Neither of us said a word. I felt the tension in my shoulders, the way my feet pressed into the ground with each step, the small crunches of twigs under my shoes. I kept listening behind me, expecting to hear the whispering again. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe just water dripping from a branch or leaves brushing together. But I knew it wasn't. Then we heard it again. This time it was clearer. Soft, broken words strung together with no sense. It sounded like someone was right behind us, whispering just above the ground. We froze. My friend's breathing got loud in the quiet, ragged and quick. I felt my throat tighten as I clicked my flashlight back on and spun around. The light wobbled as my hand shook, casting weird shadows across the trees and bushes. At first I didn't see anything, just the same empty forest floor littered with leaves and dirt. Then I moved the light a little to the left and saw her. A woman crawling on her hands and knees across the forest floor. Her hair was long and dark, hanging down over her face. Her clothes were black or dark gray, covered in dirt and pine needles. Her knees were scraped up, and her fingers dug into the dirt as she moved. She kept whispering random words, not forming any sentence I could understand. Words like moon, water, sleep, light, all said softly and without meaning. Her voice sounded tired, broken, almost like she was crying and whispering at the same time. She didn't notice us at first. She kept crawling forward slowly, her head down, hair dragging across the dirt. I felt like my feet were frozen to the ground. My friend didn't move either. We both just stared at her as the whispering continued. Then suddenly she stopped moving. Her body froze and her head turned just a little toward us. Her hair fell away from her face enough that I could see her eyes looking at us through the strands. They looked glazed over, unfocused. She was breathing hard, her shoulders rising and falling with each breath. She pushed herself up off the ground slowly, almost like she had forgotten how to stand. Her legs shook as she stood up straight. She was taller than I expected, thin and dirty, her clothes hanging off her like they were too big or soaked in sweat. She looked at us with those unfocused eyes, and for a second I thought she might fall back down. She opened her mouth and said something about looking for her campsite. Her voice was hoarse, broken, like her throat was dry or hurt. We didn't know what to do. We just stood there with our flashlights on her, the beams lighting up the dirt and torn leaves stuck to her clothes. She didn't move toward us. She just stood there swaying slightly, whispering the same broken words under her breath again, as if she couldn't stop. Finally, we turned and started walking back toward the campground. She followed us slowly, stumbling over roots and fallen branches. We didn't talk. I could hear her breathing behind us, heavy and ragged. Every so often she would whisper something again, random words with no meaning, and my skin crawled each time I heard them. It took us a while to reach the edge of the campground. When we finally saw the first tent lights through the trees, I felt my chest loosen a little. We kept walking until we were back near the bathroom building where the lights were bright and the ground turned into gravel and dirt paths. She stopped walking when we reached the open space near the picnic tables. She stood there blinking in the light, looking around as if she had never seen the campground before. I could see her more clearly then. Her face was pale under all the dirt, her lips dry and cracked. Her hands were scraped up and her fingernails were packed with mud. Her clothes looked like they had been dragged through the dirt for hours. She kept blinking and whispering the same words to herself. She turned her head from side to side, scanning the tents and the people sitting near their fires. Nobody else seemed to notice her at first. Everyone was busy talking or cooking late dinners or putting their kids to bed. She walked slowly toward one of the campsites, stumbling a little as she went. A group of people sitting around a fire looked up at her with confused expressions. One of them stood up quickly and rushed over to her. I could see his face turn from confusion to shock as he reached out to steady her. He looked back at his friends and waved them over. They surrounded her, holding her arms, helping her sit down on one of the fold-out chairs. We stood there for a minute, just watching. I felt like my legs didn't want to move. My chest felt tight and my mouth was dry. The reality of what we had just seen settled in slowly. She wasn't some ghost or forest spirit. She was just a drunk or high woman who had crawled away from her friends into the woods, maybe looking for the bathroom and getting lost in the darkness. Her friends didn't even notice she was missing. They were just sitting around the fire, laughing and drinking, while she was out there whispering nonsense to herself, crawling on the cold ground half a mile away. I thought about what would have happened if we hadn't walked that far into the woods that night. If we had stayed close to our campsite like we usually did, she would have been out there all night, whispering and crawling alone in the dirt, maybe falling asleep out there and freezing in the cold or hurting herself worse. The thought of it made my stomach turn a little. We turned and walked back to our tent in silence. My friend clicked off his flashlight before we reached the tent flap. I did the same. We crawled into our sleeping bags without a word. I lay there awake for a long time, listening to the quiet breathing of my family around me, thinking about her whispering in the dark, crawling through the dirt with no idea where she was going. I could still hear her voice in my head, those broken words with no meaning. That was the last time we did the ritual. We still went camping after that, but we never walked into the woods at night again. Every time I thought about going out there, I remembered her crawling across the forest floor in the dark, and my feet refused to move. Even now, years later, I can still see her when I close my eyes. Her hair hanging down, her hands digging into the dirt, her mouth moving with those silent, broken words. It wasn't a ghost story. It wasn't some monster hiding in the trees. It was real. That made it so much scarier. I was driving home from work one evening in early winter. The sun had already set by the time I left the office, and the sky was this dull navy blue that felt almost heavy over the horizon. I was tired from the day, my back sore from sitting at the desk too long, and I just wanted to get home, change into sweats, and heat up the leftover pasta in my fridge. The drive back to my apartment wasn't long, maybe 20 minutes with mild traffic, but there was one stretch of road I always hated. It cut straight through a patch of old farmland that hadn't been used in years. On each side of the road were thick hedges, leafless trees, and beyond them was pitch darkness. There weren't any houses or buildings for almost 5 miles. The county hadn't bothered putting any streetlights out there either, so at night, it was just me and whatever my headlights reached. That night, as I drove down the farm road, I noticed how dense the shadows felt between the tree trunks. I checked my fuel gauge out of habit. Half a tank. I kept my speed steady at about 50. I was listening to the low hum of my car engine and the occasional rustling sound of debris blowing across the road. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Just black behind me. About halfway down that road, there was this small pull-off area where farm equipment used to enter. As I approached it, I saw something on the side. My headlights caught it at an angle, illuminating part of it before it slipped back into darkness as I passed. At first, it looked like a person standing there. My chest tightened. I slowed down a bit, staring into the mirror to see if I could confirm what it was, but everything behind me was already swallowed by darkness again. My mind started racing. Was that a hitchhiker? Someone waiting for help? But this road never had people on it. I told myself maybe it was a tall branch or broken sign. I shook my head to clear the anxiety and continued driving, gripping the steering wheel tighter. About a mile later, I saw something again. This time it was more obvious. There was a person walking along the edge of the road ahead of me, wearing dark clothes, hood up, head down, like they were trying to keep warm. I slowed down as I approached. The instinct to help someone out there kicked in, but then another thought crossed my mind. Why would anyone be walking here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? There weren't any houses nearby, no parked cars broken down, and no bus routes that passed here. I drove past them slowly, keeping my eyes on their figure through the passenger side window. They didn't look up or react to my car at all. Their hands were tucked into their pockets. I couldn't see their face because of the hood. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine as I accelerated again, my eyes flicking back and forth between the road ahead and the mirror. The figure grew smaller behind me until they disappeared into the darkness. A few minutes later, I reached the traffic light that marked the end of the farm road and the beginning of the residential area. I felt relief flood through me as I turned into the main street. Street lights flickering above, cars parked on both sides, a pizza place open on the corner. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath most of the drive. That night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I kept thinking about the person on the road. I wondered if they were okay, if I should have called someone, but I didn't even know what I would say. Hi, there was a person walking down a farm road wearing a hoodie. They'd think I was wasting their time. The next evening, after work, I had to take the same road home. I told myself I wouldn't look at the side, that I'd keep my eyes on the asphalt and just drive straight through. But about halfway down, my headlights illuminated the pull-off area again. I didn't see anyone there this time, but as I passed, I noticed something on the ground. It looked like a dark pile of clothes or a bag. I drove past it but slowed down and pulled over about 200 feet ahead. My heart was pounding hard in my chest. I kept staring into my side mirror, trying to make out the shape. After about a minute, I took a deep breath, unbuckled, and stepped out of the car. The cold air bit at my face immediately, making my eyes water a little. I started walking back towards it, the gravel crunching under my shoes loud in the silence. My car's taillights glowed red behind me, casting a faint light on the asphalt. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a bag. It was a sleeping bag, and someone was curled up inside it, lying right at the edge of the pull-off. My stomach twisted. I could see the slow rise and fall of their chest under the thin material. They were alive, at least. I stood there, not knowing what to do. I didn't want to wake them up. I didn't want to scare them or be attacked if they felt threatened. But at the same time, I felt wrong just leaving them there. After a moment, I turned around and walked back to my car. I drove away feeling uneasy the entire time. For the next few days, every evening on my way home, I'd see them there, sleeping in the same spot. Once, I saw them sitting up, hunched over with their hood still covering their face, arms wrapped around their knees. They never moved when I passed, never waved or asked for help. Just sat there. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I stopped at a gas station before getting on the farm road and bought 2 bottles of water, some granola bars, and a small pack of wet wipes. When I reached the pull-off, I slowed down, rolled down the passenger window, and placed the bag on the ground next to where they usually slept. I didn't say anything. I didn't wait for them to wake up. I just left it there and drove away. The next evening, when I drove past, the bag was gone. Days turned into weeks, and each night, I'd see them in the same place. Sometimes they were standing, staring into the fields. Other times, they were sitting with their head in their hands. Once, I noticed them walking along the road again, like they had the first time I saw them. But when I slowed down to see if they needed help, they just kept walking without looking at me. Then one evening, it was raining heavily. The kind of rain that makes it hard to see even with wipers at full speed. As I approached the pull-off, I saw flashing blue and red lights ahead. 2 sheriff's cruisers were parked on the side, their headlights illuminating the pull-off and part of the ditch. I slowed down, squinting through the rain. There were 3 officers standing near the ditch, looking down at something. One of them was talking into his radio, his shoulders hunched against the rain. As I passed, I saw it. The sleeping bag was there, soaked through, half covered in mud, and leaves washed down from the bank. It wasn't moving. The officers were all looking down at it, their faces hard and closed off. One of them pulled out a notebook and started writing something down, while another bent over and unzipped the bag. Even through the roar of the rain on my roof, I could hear one of them sigh loudly. I kept driving. My chest felt tight. I drove all the way home with my hands trembling on the steering wheel. That night, I sat on my couch, staring at the dark TV screen, listening to the sound of rain tapping against my windows. I felt a heaviness in my chest that wouldn't go away. I kept thinking about the first night I saw them, walking with their head down, hands in pockets, looking like they just wanted to be left alone. I wondered how long they'd been out there before I noticed them, how long they'd been there before anyone else did. Over the next few days, I kept checking the local news sites, looking for any mention of it, but there was nothing. No name, no story, no updates. It was like they had never existed at all. Just a shape on the side of a dark road in the middle of nowhere. Since then, I still take that road home sometimes, though not as often as before. Every time I pass the pull-off, I look at the spot where they used to sleep. It's empty now, just dirt, weeds, and broken asphalt. But I still see them there in my mind, curled up in their thin sleeping bag, their hood pulled tight over their face. I wonder if they knew anyone cared, even a little. I wonder if they ever knew I left those granola bars and water for them. I wonder if it made any difference at all. Now, when I drive past that spot, I don't feel scared like I used to. I just feel sad. Because that person wasn't some shadowy figure waiting to hurt me. They weren't some threat hiding in the darkness. They were just someone who fell through the cracks of everything. Someone who spent their last nights lying cold and alone on the side of a forgotten road while the rest of us drove by, too afraid to look for more than a second. I think about them every time I see someone sitting alone on a curb or walking with all their belongings in plastic bags. I think about how easy it is to ignore them, how easy it is to just keep driving. And every time I pass that pull-off, I keep my eyes on the road, but in my mind, I see them there, still sitting quietly in the dark, waiting for a ride that never came. I woke up around 5 in the morning, feeling restless and tired. The air in my room was heavy, and it was still dark outside. My window was cracked open just a bit because the nights had been warm lately, and I liked to feel fresh air on my face while I slept. I could hear birds starting to wake up outside, their faint chirping mixing with the quiet hum of the town that hadn't fully woken up yet. I got out of bed slowly, feeling a slight ache in my back from the way I'd been sleeping. I went to the bathroom, splashed some cold water on my face, and stared at myself in the mirror for a while. My hair was sticking out at weird angles, and my eyes looked tired, with dark circles under them. I brushed my teeth, washed my face properly, and combed my hair down, then went back to my room to change. I put on an old gray t-shirt and dark jeans, grabbed my shoes, and quietly stepped out into the hallway so I wouldn't wake my parents up. I tied my shoes on the porch, sitting there for a minute, looking at the sky starting to get lighter. The sun wasn't up yet, but the deep navy blue was fading to gray. I decided to go for a walk to clear my head before the day really started. I didn't feel like taking my phone or anything with me, so I left it inside and locked the door behind me. I walked down the driveway and onto the narrow road that led out to the main street. Everything felt still and silent, except for some dogs barking far away. The houses on my street were quiet, with only a few lights on in windows. I walked past them quickly and turned down a side street that led towards the edge of town. There was a small patch of woods there that I always passed by, but never actually went into alone. I don't really know why I decided to go there that morning. Maybe because I felt like I needed something to distract me, or maybe because I just wanted to feel something different. The grass was wet with dew, soaking the bottom of my jeans as I walked off the road and into the open area before the trees started. There was a rusted metal fence running along the side of the woods. Someone had cut a gap in it years ago, big enough for a person to step through. I slipped between the sharp edges, careful not to rip my shirt. Inside the woods it felt colder. The trees were packed close together, and there wasn't much light coming through yet. The ground was covered in dead leaves and broken branches. As I walked deeper in, I felt the silence wrapping around me, making every step sound louder than it should. My breathing felt louder too. I could hear it echoing in my head as I moved between the trunks. I kept walking, looking down at the ground to watch where I was stepping, so I wouldn't trip over roots or rocks. After a while I realized I couldn't hear the birds anymore. It was just silent, with only the sound of my footsteps and my breathing. I stopped for a second, standing completely still, and listened. I could hear my heart beating in my ears. That's when I heard something else. It was faint, like a rustling sound far behind me. I turned quickly, scanning the trees, but I couldn't see anything. Everything looked the same, dark trunks, leaves, small patches of early morning light breaking through. I waited there for a few seconds, staring hard into the shadows, but nothing moved. I told myself it was probably a bird or a squirrel. I turned back around and kept walking, trying to shake off the feeling that was starting to crawl up the back of my neck. As I moved deeper into the woods, I felt like the trees were getting thicker. The light was dimmer there, and I could see the ground rising up ahead of me into a small hill. I started climbing it slowly, using my hands to push away branches and tall weeds. When I got to the top, I saw that the hill sloped down steeply on the other side into a narrow gully. There were fallen trees down there, big ones that had probably come down in storms years ago. I could see broken trunks sticking out like jagged teeth. I stood there for a while, breathing hard from the climb and looking down into the gully. I still felt that uneasy feeling in my chest, like something was off. I turned to look behind me again and scanned the trees. Nothing moved. I listened, but there was no sound except for a faint breeze rustling the leaves high up. I started to climb down into the gully. The dirt was loose and dry, and I slipped a couple of times, grabbing onto tree roots to keep myself from falling. When I reached the bottom, I stepped over branches and twisted chunks of bark. I could smell the damp rot of the fallen trees. It smelled like old earth and mold. I walked further along the bottom of the gully until I came to a huge fallen tree. Its trunk was wide, almost as tall as my waist, and it stretched across the gully like a bridge. The bark was peeling off, revealing pale, smooth wood underneath. I decided to sit on it for a bit to catch my breath. I climbed up, brushing dirt off my hands on my jeans, and sat down, dangling my legs over the side. The silence pressed in around me again. I looked up at the trees, their branches twisting high above me. I could see little patches of sky through the gaps. It was getting brighter now, but the sun still hadn't come up over the trees. As I sat there, I felt that feeling again, the one like I was being watched. I turned my head slowly, scanning the trees on the far side of the gully. At first I didn't see anything, just dark trunks and tangled undergrowth. Then my eyes landed on something that didn't look like the rest. It was a shape, half hidden behind a tree, low to the ground. I squinted, trying to focus, and saw it move slightly. My stomach tightened. It was dark brown, blending in with the shadows, but I could see the shape of a head and shoulders crouched low. I froze completely. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what it was. I thought maybe it was a homeless person hiding out there, or maybe someone hunting illegally. But then I saw the way it moved again, slow and steady, like it wasn't in any hurry. It shifted its weight, and I saw the shape of its legs. They were bent at an angle that didn't look right for a human crouching. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I watched as it slowly turned its head towards me. I couldn't see its face properly in the dim light, but I felt a cold wave rush through my chest. I felt like it was looking straight into me. My whole body was tense, ready to bolt, but I didn't want to move and set it off. I sat there for what felt like forever, staring at it, and it just stared back, completely still. Finally, it shifted again, and I saw it turning its whole body away from me. It moved low to the ground, almost crawling, and disappeared behind a thick clump of bushes. I stayed frozen for a while after it was gone, my mind blank except for the sound of my heart thudding in my chest. When I finally moved, I slid off the log as quietly as I could and started walking back the way I'd come. Every step felt like it took 100 years. I kept expecting to hear it behind me or see it out of the corner of my eye, but the woods stayed silent. I climbed back up the hill, digging my fingers into the dirt to pull myself up faster. When I reached the top, I stood for a second, scanning the trees below me, but I couldn't see anything moving. I didn't run, but I walked as fast as I could, keeping my eyes on the ground so I wouldn't trip. My breathing was ragged, and my hands were shaking. When I finally saw the rusted fence through the trees, I felt like I was about to cry. I pushed through the gap and walked quickly out into the open grass. The sky was lighter now, pale blue and pink at the edges. I walked all the way back to the road without looking back. When I got home, I stood on the porch for a while, trying to calm down before I went inside. I could hear my parents moving around in the kitchen, talking softly to each other. I opened the door and went straight to my room. I sat down on my bed and stared at my hands. They were dirty and scratched from climbing. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw that morning. I didn't even want to think about it too hard. But later that week, I heard on the local news that a mountain lion had been spotted near the edge of town. Animal control set traps for it, but they never caught it. They said it probably moved on to another area. But I knew what I saw in those woods that morning, crouched low behind the trees, watching me. It wasn't afraid of me. It wasn't running away. It was just watching, deciding. After that, I never went back into those woods alone. Every time I walked past them, I felt my chest tighten and my skin crawl, remembering how it felt to be watched like that. It made me realize how quiet and hidden things can be, just a few feet away, and you wouldn't even know. The world felt different after that morning, like there were things just out of sight, waiting, and if you were unlucky enough to catch their attention, there was nothing you could do about it. I went back to my normal routine after that, waking up early, getting ready for the day, going to school or work, and walking home in the afternoons. But something in me felt different. I started noticing the way shadows moved, the way leaves rustled even when there was no wind. Sometimes I would wake up at night thinking I heard something moving outside my window, and I would lie there completely still, staring into the dark, waiting for it to pass. I never saw it again, but every now and then, when I'm walking somewhere quiet and I feel like I'm alone, I remember how it felt sitting on that fallen tree, staring into the shadows and realizing something was staring back. It's a feeling that never really goes away. It's like a part of me is always waiting for it to come back, and I don't think that feeling will ever leave me completely. I always liked going on solo hikes on weekends. I didn't tell anyone about where I was going most of the time. I just packed my small backpack, filled my water bottles, grabbed a protein bar or two, checked my shoes and socks, and left early in the morning. I liked being alone in the woods. There was something calming about hearing nothing but my own footsteps on dry leaves and birds singing somewhere up in the trees where I could never see them. That day I picked a trail I had only walked once before. It wasn't very far from my place, maybe a 40-minute drive. It was a long loop trail that went around a lake deep in the woods, almost hidden from the main highway. I parked my car in the small dirt lot, locked it, and started walking. It was a quiet morning. The sun was bright, and there was still dew on the grass around the lot. I remember I felt good that morning, like nothing could ruin it. For the first hour or so, I just walked. I wasn't in a rush, and the trail was flat and well marked. The lake came into view on my left side. The water was dark and smooth, reflecting the trees like a mirror. I stopped to drink some water and stretched my legs a bit. Then I kept walking, enjoying the smell of pine and damp earth. After a while, I noticed the trail became narrower. I hadn't remembered it getting that narrow before. I thought maybe there was a split I had missed. I checked the ground for footprints, but saw nothing fresh. It had rained the night before, so any prints from early morning hikers would still be clear. I didn't see any. The trail kept going deeper into the woods, away from the lake. I thought it would loop back eventually. The trees started getting taller, and the sky disappeared behind them. The air smelled stronger here, like wet moss and old wood. I liked that smell. It reminded me of being a kid, exploring the woods near my grandparents' farm. I kept walking for what felt like another hour. I didn't see anyone else. No hikers, no runners, no one. I started feeling a bit uneasy, but told myself it was just because I hadn't been here before. I stopped and drank some water, then took out my phone to check my GPS. There was no signal. I wasn't surprised. I put it back in my pocket and kept moving forward, figuring I would eventually reach the main trail again. The ground started sloping upwards. My calves burned as I climbed over some fallen trees blocking the path. The trail almost disappeared under old branches and patches of moss. At one point, I thought about turning back, but the idea of retracing my steps for 2 hours felt worse than moving forward. I told myself it couldn't be too far now. Then I saw it. A rusted old fence running along the left side of the trail, partly buried under leaves and dirt. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Behind the fence, about 50 feet away, stood a small shack. The wood was black with age, and half the roof had collapsed. The windows were broken, and an old metal chimney stuck out of the roof, bent at an angle like something had tried to pull it down. I stopped walking. I didn't like seeing that shack. It felt wrong, like it shouldn't be there. The forest was silent. I couldn't even hear birds anymore. I listened carefully for a while. Nothing. I felt my heartbeat in my neck and temples. I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at that broken shack behind the fence. My breathing got heavy and loud in my ears. I started thinking maybe someone lived there. Maybe someone dangerous. There were stories in the news, sometimes about people living off-grid, far away from society. Some were harmless, some were not. I didn't want to find out which type this person would be. I turned to leave, but something made me look back at the shack one more time. That was when I saw movement. In the broken window. Just a flicker, like someone shifting their weight behind the wall. My stomach dropped. I couldn't see clearly, but it was definitely something or someone moving inside. I didn't wait to look again. I started walking fast down the trail, not running but moving quickly, trying not to make too much noise with my feet crunching the leaves. After about 10 minutes of fast walking, I glanced back. The shack was long out of sight. I tried to calm my breathing. I felt stupid for panicking. I told myself it was probably just an animal, or maybe the wind moving a broken board inside. I kept walking, feeling more and more tired. The sun was high now. Sweat was dripping down my back, making my shirt stick to my skin. Then I heard something behind me. It was faint at first, like a branch breaking far back on the trail. I stopped and listened. Silence. I started walking again, but then I heard it again, closer this time. Dry leaves crunching under footsteps. I stopped and listened. My heart was pounding so hard I felt like it was going to break my ribs. I didn't hear anything. I forced myself to keep moving, but every few minutes I would hear it again. Soft, slow footsteps behind me. I couldn't tell how far. I just knew it was there. I tried to convince myself it was a deer or a coyote following me out of curiosity. But the steps sounded too careful, too human. They would stop when I stopped. They would continue when I continued. I started walking even faster. My legs burned. My throat was dry even though I had been drinking water. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to see who or what was there. I just wanted to get out of those woods. After what felt like forever, the trail started going downhill again. I recognized a fallen tree on the side of the trail. Relief flooded through me. I was back on the main trail. I walked as fast as I could, almost jogging now. The footsteps behind me stopped. I didn't hear them again, but I didn't feel safe. My shoulders were tight, and I kept glancing back every few steps. The forest was silent except for my footsteps and my ragged breathing. I finally saw the parking lot through the trees. My car was the only one there. I almost cried when I saw it. I walked quickly across the lot, unlocked my car with shaking hands, threw my backpack in the passenger seat, and climbed in. I locked the doors immediately. I sat there for a few minutes, breathing hard, looking out the windows, checking the tree line for any movement. Nothing. I started the engine and drove away without looking back. My hands were shaking on the steering the whole drive home. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my head was throbbing from dehydration and fear. When I got home, I took the longest shower of my life. The whole time, I kept thinking about those footsteps, how they matched mine so perfectly, how they stopped when I stopped, how they never got too close, but never fell behind too far either. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak in my house, every drip of water from the bathroom faucet. The image of that broken shack kept coming back to me. The flicker of movement behind the broken window, the quiet, careful footsteps behind me on the trail. I never went back to that trail again. I still hike, but only on popular trails, ones with other people always around. I tell people where I'm going now, every time. I keep thinking about how close I came to something that day. I don't know what it was or what it wanted, but I know for sure there was someone else out there in those woods with me, moving through the trees, staying just out of sight, matching my steps perfectly until I reached the safety of my car. I don't think they wanted to be seen. I don't think they wanted to talk. I think they just wanted to follow me. And that thought still keeps me awake at night, listening for footsteps that aren't there. I had been working at the distribution warehouse for almost 4 months when the overtime shifts started getting ridiculous. I didn't mind the work, honestly. I liked keeping my head down, stacking boxes on pallets, wrapping them, and moving on to the next. It was simple and repetitive, something I could just do without thinking too much. But that week, management told everyone that the night shift needed people, and they offered an extra $6 an hour. I needed the money for my truck repairs and bills, so I signed up for 4 overnight shifts in a row. My first overnight was rough. I hadn't stayed up all night since high school exam weeks, and I drank too much coffee before leaving, making my stomach churn the entire shift. The warehouse was loud, but somehow it still felt quiet, because only half the workers were there, everyone in their own little world. I remember walking through the wide aisles under the harsh white lights, the echo of forklift beeps and rattling pallets bouncing off the metal racks that reached so far up I had to tilt my head back all the way to see the top shelves. By the third night, I was getting used to the shift. I moved faster and didn't feel so dead during the early morning hours. But I started noticing little things that felt off. At around 2 a.m., I'd be pushing a pallet jack down an aisle and catch movement from the corner of my eye, like someone quickly stepping out of view behind a rack. I would stop and look down the side aisles, expecting to see a coworker, but no one would be there. I brushed it off as tired eyes playing tricks on me. Still, it made my chest feel tight every time. On the fourth night, I clocked in at 10 p.m. like usual. I stretched my arms while walking to my assigned area, scanning the warehouse floor. The same flickering light near the packing station was blinking on and off again. I thought about telling maintenance, but kept walking. I was assigned to the far end of the warehouse that night, near where the back wall met the loading docks. That area always felt colder, and the air smelled like wet cardboard mixed with old motor oil from the trucks. I grabbed my scanner and checked the list. It was simple. Pick items from aisles 89 through 92, wrap the pallets, and leave them by dock door 14. Easy. I got to work, scanning boxes, lifting them onto the pallet, walking back and forth down the aisle as my mind wandered. It was around 1:30 a.m. when I first heard the sound. I was placing a heavy box of car batteries onto the pallet when a sharp metallic clang echoed from down the aisle, followed by the faint scraping of something dragging along the concrete. I stopped what I was doing and stood there listening. The forklift drivers were working on the other side of the warehouse. The noise was close, too close for it to be one of them. I waited, holding my breath, but nothing else came. I tried to ignore the tension in my shoulders as I went back to work. A few minutes later, it happened again, this time louder and followed by a low, rhythmic thumping that sent vibrations through the metal racks. It sounded like someone was dragging a steel bar along the racks, then banging it hard against them every few steps. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I didn't want to look. I just kept wrapping the pallet, the clear plastic catching the lights above and reflecting my face back at me in thin, stretched smears. But then the noise got closer, and I felt this tight pull in my chest that forced me to turn around. The aisle stretched about 50 feet ahead, ending in a cross aisle that ran perpendicular. It was empty. No one was there. I tried to tell myself someone was messing around, but no one played like that here. Everyone just wanted to finish their shift and go home. I forced myself to keep working. The thumping stopped for a while, replaced by that quiet hum of warehouse lights and distant beeps of forklifts reversing. At around 2:15 a.m., I finished the pallet and wheeled it over to dock door 14. The air near the docks was freezing. I felt it sink into my bones and stiffen my fingers. I set the pallet down and stretched my back, looking down the long row of dock doors. They all looked the same, just huge steel doors lined up in a row, each with a dull yellow light above it. That's when I saw the door at the far end slowly rolling up. I felt my stomach drop. No trucks were scheduled for this hour. Receiving was closed until 5. The door rose inch by inch with a grinding mechanical whine. I watched it go up, too shocked to move, until it reached halfway. Cold outside air poured in, smelling like diesel fumes and damp asphalt. I expected to see a truck driver stepping through, maybe someone who arrived too early. But no one came in. I stood there frozen, staring at the empty blackness beyond the door, my ears picking up the sound of the wind moving past the loading bay. I waited, listening, feeling the cold air bite at my face. Then I heard soft footsteps on the concrete outside, slow and steady, moving towards the open door. I couldn't see anything in the darkness beyond. The footsteps stopped just outside the light's reach. My chest felt tight, and my breathing grew shallow. The hair on my neck prickled like needles. I felt this urge to call out and ask who was there, but the words didn't come. My throat felt locked. I stood completely still for what felt like forever, staring at that open black doorway, half expecting someone to step in. But no one did. The door just sat there, half open, letting in freezing wind that fluttered the loose edge of plastic wrap on my pallet. After what felt like minutes, the door slowly started rolling back down. The motor whined again as it lowered, cutting off the cold breeze and the smell of outside. When it shut completely, the warehouse fell silent again except for distant beeping and clanking from forklifts far away. I felt this sudden need to leave that area. I grabbed my scanner and practically speed walked away from the docks back into the aisles. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the scanner. I felt dizzy, my stomach churning like I was about to throw up. For the rest of the shift, I kept my eyes down. I worked faster than I ever had, finishing my orders without stopping to stretch or rest. Every little noise made me jump. I kept seeing shadows move just outside my vision, behind racks or around corners, and every time I turned to look, nothing was there. At around 5 a.m., I walked to the break room to wait for clock out. My legs felt like jelly, and my eyes were burning from staying wide open for so long. I sat on the hard plastic chair, staring at the vending machines. The hum of their compressors filled the silence. I felt drained, my mind racing with what happened. I kept thinking about the open dock door, the footsteps, the dragging metal noise. When my shift ended at 6, I practically ran to my truck. The sky was turning a pale gray blue, and birds were starting to chirp in the distance. I sat in my truck for a minute, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, trying to calm my breathing. The warmth from the heater slowly thawed my numb fingers. As I drove out of the parking lot, I looked back at the warehouse, that massive silent building squatting under the early dawn sky. Part of me wanted to tell the supervisor what happened, but I knew they'd just shrug it off or say I was half asleep. Maybe they'd check the camera footage. Maybe not. I spent the whole drive home thinking about who or what could have been outside that door at 2 a.m. It could have been a driver arriving too early and walking around the loading bay. It could have been a homeless person looking for shelter near the docks. But neither of those thoughts made me feel any better. The dragging metal noise haunted me the most, the way it echoed through the aisles like someone was scraping a steel bar along the racks. I couldn't shake that sound out of my head. When I got home, I took off my boots and uniform and showered. I stood under the hot water until it ran cold, trying to wash off the chill that had sunk deep into my bones. I crawled into bed with wet hair and pulled the blanket up to my chin, shivering as the early morning sun slipped through the blinds. My eyes burned with exhaustion, but sleep wouldn't come for a long time. That was the last overnight shift I ever signed up for. I told management I couldn't handle nights anymore. Every time I walk past dock door 14 on my regular shifts, I feel my chest tighten. I can't help thinking about that door rolling up into darkness, the icy air drifting in, and footsteps stopping just outside the light. I still hear the dragging metal sound in my head sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to sleep. No matter how I try to explain it to myself, nothing makes the feeling go away. In the end, I never found out who was there that night, or why the door opened on its own. I just know that something was out there, and it was close, too close for comfort. And that was enough to make me never want to work nights again. I remember that trip to Guatemala like it was yesterday. My girlfriend and I had been planning it for months. We wanted something real, something that would pull us away from our phones and routines and let us feel what it was like to exist in the middle of nature, far from any cities or lights or noise. So we decided to hike to Tikal. It was a 3-day trek through thick jungle, starting from a small village. We carried everything ourselves: tent, sleeping bags, food, gas stove, water filtration kit, first aid, rain gear, and all the little things that weigh down your bag when you think you're packing light. The first day was long. We hiked from sunrise to past sunset, with only a few breaks to drink or eat some peanuts or dry cookies. The jungle felt alive around us, birds calling out to each other from high above, insects buzzing everywhere, and the thick smell of earth and decaying plants. I remember feeling sweat run down my back nonstop. My shirt stuck to me like glue. When we arrived at the first ranger campsite, it was already dark. The campsite wasn't really anything, just a small clearing with a makeshift shack built out of planks and a plastic tarp roof. There was one ranger, a man in his 40s, dark skin, sun-wrinkled face, wearing green fatigues. He had a hammock tied up inside the shack and a small gas lantern hanging from the roof beam. We set up our tent near the shack, and he watched us silently, sitting on a tree stump, chewing on something. We didn't talk much because our Spanish wasn't great, and his English was even worse. We cooked a small dinner, instant noodles mixed with tuna, then crawled into the tent and passed out instantly, listening to the humming and chirping of the jungle. The next day was much the same. Wake up at dawn, quickly pack up before it got too hot, and start walking. My shoulders ached so badly from the pack straps cutting into them. My calves burned on every uphill climb. The trail was narrow and muddy in parts, with thick vines hanging down like curtains. At one point, we saw fresh jaguar prints in the mud. They were huge and still crisp around the edges, meaning the animal had passed through maybe an hour before us. It made the hairs stand up on my arms. The ranger who led us for that stretch pointed at them and just nodded, as if to say, yes, they're here always. By the time we got to the second ranger station, the sky had turned a dark, heavy gray. The air felt thick, like it was hard to breathe. This campsite was even more basic than the first. Just a small shack again, but this one was older, with wood blackened from years of rain and sun. It had a single bench nailed together out of logs, sitting outside under a tin roof that rattled whenever the wind blew. There was a small clearing around it, but otherwise, dense jungle pressed in on every side. Huge ceiba trees towered above us, their trunks so wide I couldn't wrap my arms halfway around them. We set up our tent just off to the side, near a tree that looked sturdy enough to break the wind. I remember setting up our rainfly extra tight because the ranger gestured at the sky and said, "Tormenta grande." Big storm. We cooked dinner quickly, rice and beans this time, and then lay in the tent listening to the distant rumble of thunder. The rain came not long after. At first just a light tapping on the tent roof, then harder and harder, until it sounded like thousands of small rocks hitting us all at once. The wind picked up and the whole tent shook. I lay awake for hours listening to the storm rage around us, trying to calm my breathing every time the thunder cracked directly overhead. Sometime around 4 in the morning, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. The rain was still pounding down, wind still shaking the tent, but there was something else. A sound. Voices. Male voices, deep and muffled by the rain but close. It was a strange feeling, like my brain tried to tell me it was just part of a dream, but I knew it wasn't. My girlfriend stirred beside me. I reached over and unzipped the tent fly just enough to peek out. The rain hit my face like cold needles. I couldn't see anything, only darkness and heavy sheets of water falling straight down. But then I saw them. 2 figures walking through the trees towards our campsite, silhouettes moving between flashes of lightning. I felt my chest tighten instantly. My first thought was bandits. I'd heard stories about tourists getting robbed in remote parts of Guatemala, and here we were, 2 foreigners with expensive gear and no one around for miles. The ranger's shack was dark and silent. I quietly told my girlfriend to stay in the tent no matter what, to stay hidden, because I didn't know what was about to happen. I stepped out of the tent into the mud. The rain soaked me instantly. I stood up straight, trying to look calm and not scared even though my knees were shaking. The 2 men walked closer. In the flashes of lightning, I saw their faces dark-skinned, lean, wearing simple clothes, and both carrying rifles slung over their shoulders, the barrels pointed down at the ground. One wore a cap pulled low over his face. The other had a poncho that dripped water constantly as he moved. My heart was beating so fast it hurt. I thought about all the warnings I'd heard, about staying with your group, not wandering off alone, and here I was standing in front of 2 armed strangers in the middle of the jungle at 4 a.m. Before I could think of anything else to do, my girlfriend unzipped the tent and stepped out behind me. I wanted to tell her to get back inside, but it was too late. She stood next to me in the rain, hair plastered to her face, looking at them with wide eyes. The men stopped a few meters away. They didn't raise their rifles or act aggressive. They just looked exhausted. They gestured at the shack and then at the sky. I realized they were asking for shelter from the storm. I nodded and pointed to the covered bench area near the shack. They walked over slowly, sat down under the tin roof, water pouring off their clothes, rifles leaning against their knees. We didn't really speak. There was no need. I just walked over to our camp stove, hands shaking from adrenaline and cold, and lit it under the small awning near the shack. I put on a pot of water and pulled out the jar of instant coffee. My girlfriend crouched next to me, watching quietly. I poured them each a tin mug of steaming black coffee and handed it over. They took it with small nods, and I could see the relief in their eyes. For a few minutes, we just sat there in the pounding rain, the only light coming from my small headlamp and the flickering camp stove flame. The smell of burnt coffee mixed with the wet earth and smoke from the stove gas. Then it happened. A bright flash lit up the entire campsite like daylight. There was a sound, a deep cracking boom that didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like the earth itself splitting apart. I felt the ground shiver under me. Before I could process what was happening, a massive tree, easily over 100 feet tall, crashed down directly onto our tent. The noise was unreal, a violent tearing and smashing of wood and nylon and earth. I felt the shockwave in my chest. For a moment, no one moved. Then I ran forward through the rain, my feet sinking into the mud, my hands grabbing at torn pieces of the tent and broken branches. But there was nothing to save. The tree had crushed it completely. The trunk was thicker than a car, and it lay right across the middle of where we had been sleeping just 5 minutes earlier. Our sleeping bags, mats, backpacks, all flattened under its weight. I just stood there, the rain pouring down my face, mixing with tears I didn't even realize were there. My girlfriend came up beside me and grabbed my arm. We looked at each other without speaking. The reality hit me so hard I felt dizzy. If I hadn't woken up to hear those voices, if I hadn't gotten out of the tent to check, or worse, if my girlfriend had actually listened and stayed inside like I told her to, both of us would have been under that tree. Dead. Instantly. No chance to crawl out or scream for help. Just gone. The 2 hunters came over. One of them patted me on the shoulder. The other shook his head slowly, staring at the fallen tree with wide eyes. They finished their coffee and sat back down under the roof, staring out at the storm. None of us spoke for a long time. I sat there with my girlfriend, feeling the cold seep deep into my bones, the rain still pounding around us. I looked at her, soaked and shivering, and felt this huge wave of relief that she was alive, that I was alive, that those strangers had shown up at exactly the right moment to save us without even knowing it. The rest of the night we spent sitting up, wrapped in our rain jackets, under the small roof of the shack. The hunters stayed until dawn, then picked up their rifles, nodded at us, and walked off into the jungle without a word, disappearing between the trees as if they had never been there at all. The ranger came out when the sun rose and saw what had happened. He just shook his head slowly and said something in Spanish I didn't understand, then started helping us gather what little was left of our gear. Later that day, we continued our trek to Tikal. I carried my bag strapped together with rope because the frame was bent from the tree crushing it. My girlfriend wore the same clothes from the night before, still damp. We walked in silence for hours, each of us lost in thought, feeling every step on the muddy trail. But deep down, I felt something new, a quiet awareness of how fragile life was, how close death could come without warning, and how sometimes you are saved by something as simple as a stranger's voice in the middle of the night. When we finally reached Tikal, we stood at the top of Temple 4, looking out across the endless green of the jungle stretching to the horizon. The air was heavy with heat and insects buzzed around us, but I felt calm. I looked at her, standing next to me, her face lit by the sun breaking through the clouds, and all I could think was, we're still here. That tree didn't take us. Those men showed up at the right moment. Life gave us another chance. And I knew, as we stood there watching the jungle breathe under the morning sun, that I would never forget how close we came to dying, and I work as a counselor at a summer camp deep in the woods of Southern California. It's the kind of place where if you walk 10 minutes away from camp, you're surrounded by nothing but thick oak trees, rocky slopes, and dry brush that crackles under your shoes. The roads that lead in are rough, steep, and winding, making it feel like you're leaving the real world behind with every mile you drive in. I've always loved this camp, despite its creepy sides. Maybe because of them. There's something about the isolation, the way the stars look when there's no city lights to wash them out, and the smell of pine mixed with campfire smoke that always makes me feel calm. But this place has its unsettling parts too, and this story still comes back to me late at night. We had just finished a long day of activities. The sun had set hours ago, and all the kids were tucked into their bunks, the sounds of crickets and distant coyote howls filling the quiet spaces between cabins. I stood outside my cabin, leaning against the railing, breathing in the cool mountain air. The moon was bright enough to see without a flashlight, silver light casting shadows of the trees all over camp. Another counselor, Matt, stood nearby, drinking from a dented water bottle, both of us enjoying the calm silence after a chaotic day. I remember feeling peaceful, content, listening to the wind moving through the trees above us. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, Sadie appeared running down the dirt path, her arms flailing as she motioned to a group following her. Behind her was her entire cabin of teenage girls, all dressed in black sweatshirts and black leggings, some of them wearing beanies or hoodies pulled up. They were moving fast, almost stumbling over each other on the rocky ground, breathing hard and looking completely terrified. Sadie ran past us, grabbing her girls and telling them to get into their cabin. Her eyes were wide, her face pale even in the dim light. She turned back towards me for a moment, breathing heavily, and she yelled that she thought they heard a ghost. She said she would meet me back there once her girls were asleep to explain everything. Then she disappeared into her cabin with the girls huddled around her, slamming the door behind them. Sadie was not someone who scared easily. She was the type who would chase bears away with pots and pans, who volunteered to kill rattlesnakes if they came near camp. Seeing her like that put a tight knot in my chest. I stood there for a minute, listening to the sounds of the forest, wondering what in the world could have shaken her that badly. Matt looked at me, raised his eyebrows, and walked back to his own cabin, leaving me alone with the frogs croaking down by the creek. About 30 minutes later, Sadie came back down the path, quietly closing her cabin door behind her. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, a flashlight hanging from her wrist by its strap. She walked over to where I stood and took a deep breath, then started telling me what happened. She said she had taken her girls on a night hike. They liked doing those, calling them ninja hikes, telling the kids to dress in black to blend into the forest. It made them feel brave and mysterious, and the girls loved sneaking around in the darkness, giggling and tripping over each other's feet. The hike had been going great. They walked along the ridge, away from camp, past the little pond and the half-burnt stump that everyone said was haunted. They were heading back, moving through one of the darker parts of the trail, the part where the trees grow so close together that even moonlight barely reaches the ground. That was when they heard it. Sadie said at first it sounded like a small child calling for help, far away but clear enough to hear between the trees. They all froze, trying to see where it was coming from. She said it called out again, "Help," but this time the sound was wrong. It still sounded like a child, but there was something else underneath it, like a growl or static. The girls grabbed her arms, shaking with fear. The third time they heard it, Sadie said it no longer sounded human at all. It sounded distorted, echoing off the trees, getting deeper and harsher but still somehow using the same word. Help. That was when she panicked and ran, grabbing the girls and forcing them to sprint all the way back to camp. As she told me this, I could see her hands shaking, her eyes darting into the woods behind me like she half expected to see something standing there. She finished telling me, and we stood in silence, listening to the insects chirping all around us. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, goosebumps rising along my arms. But then the logical part of my brain kicked in. If someone was really out there yelling for help, we had to check. If there was even a chance that a kid was hurt or lost out there, we couldn't ignore it. I told her we should go look. She nodded slowly, clearly not wanting to go back, but she agreed. We were counselors, after all. We had responsibilities. We grabbed flashlights from our cabins and started walking down the path, our boots crunching over the gravel. The moonlight faded as we moved under the thick oak branches. Our beams cut through the darkness, illuminating broken twigs, dry leaves, and old boot prints from other hikes. We reached the spot where she said she first heard it. We stood still, listening. At first, there was nothing but the quiet rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant hum of crickets, the faint yipping of coyotes somewhere across the valley. Then we heard it. It didn't sound like a child this time. It didn't even sound like a human voice. It was a screech, high-pitched and piercing, but layered underneath was a rattling growl that vibrated through the ground. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. It echoed off the rocks, off the trees, from deep in the ravine below and high up on the slope above us. I felt my knees go weak, my stomach turning to ice. Sadie grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. We stood there, frozen, feeling the weight of the darkness press down on us. The screech came again, louder this time, and the trees around us seemed to tremble. I felt an instinctive panic rise inside me, like my body was screaming at me to run, to get away from there as fast as possible. I could feel Sadie shaking beside me, her grip tightening even more. Without thinking, we both turned and started running back up the trail, our flashlights bouncing wildly, throwing erratic shadows across the ground. My lungs burned with cold air, my feet slipped on the loose dirt, and every noise I heard behind me felt like something chasing us, something massive and fast, about to grab me by the back of my neck. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of camp, where the cabins stood in a circle under the floodlight by the dining hall. We both stood there, breathing hard, our chests heaving, trying to calm down. I could feel sweat dripping down my back despite the cool air. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my flashlight. We didn't say a word to each other, just walked to our own cabins and went inside, locking the doors behind us. That night, I lay awake on my bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and crack of the old cabin wood. The wind blew through the cracks, whistling in a way that made me think of that screech, making my skin crawl all over again. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark trees around me, heard that horrible sound echoing off the mountain. The next morning, at breakfast, I sat with Sadie at the counselor table. Neither of us talked much. The kids were all chattering around us about their crafts and swim tests, and who liked who. I kept zoning out, thinking about the previous night, about what we heard. My brain kept trying to come up with explanations. Maybe it was a cougar screaming, or a coyote getting attacked by something bigger. Maybe there was an animal in pain out there. But deep down, I knew it didn't sound like any animal I had ever heard. It sounded like something trying to sound human and failing miserably. Later that morning, the camp director called a meeting in the dining hall. All the counselors gathered at the back while the campers sat at the tables eating pancakes and cereal. The director stood up front, adjusting his old baseball cap, and told us to make sure to tell the kids not to worry about the sounds they heard at night. He said that bobcats often roamed the hills around camp, and they made noises that sounded like children crying or screaming. He told us they were harmless, and to just ignore them if we heard them, but to remind the campers that no animals were going to come into camp with so many people around. I felt a wave of relief when he said that, but it didn't erase the feeling I had in my chest. I've heard bobcats scream before. It's terrifying, no doubt, and it does sound human in a sick, twisted way. But what we heard that night didn't sound like a bobcat. It sounded bigger, deeper, more angry, like it was echoing out of a cave or from somewhere deep underground. Still, I nodded along with everyone else, pretending that explanation was good enough. Sadie just stood there staring at the ground, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. The rest of the summer, our friends teased us about it. Every time a squirrel rustled a bush or a deer snorted in the woods, someone would say, "Careful, it's the bobcat ghost," and everyone would laugh. Me and Sadie would force smiles, pretending it was funny, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. That no matter what anyone said, no matter how many animal facts were thrown at us, we knew what we heard that night was not just a bobcat screaming in the distance. Weeks passed, and we finished the season. Kids went home, cabins were cleaned out, the docks were pulled from the lake, and the staff all packed up their cars to head back to their lives outside of camp. On my last night there, I sat on the steps of my empty cabin, looking out over the dark forest. The wind blew through the trees, bending the branches so they creaked and moaned. Somewhere far away, I heard a coyote yipping to its pack. I thought about how beautiful this place was, how small and quiet I felt sitting alone under the stars. But then I remembered that night, that awful sound echoing through the trees, the way it felt like something ancient and angry was watching us from the darkness. I felt the same chill crawl up my spine, the same goosebumps rise on my arms. I moved to that small town thinking it would be peaceful. I'd been working from my laptop for a couple years already, and the city was draining me. I needed quiet. Somewhere I could step outside in the mornings and just hear birds, nothing else. This place seemed perfect for that. Population 200, according to the cracked old sign at the town's edge. A single gas station with a small store attached, 2 taverns, 1 church, a volunteer fire department that looked like it hadn't seen a call in years, and a post office the size of a garden shed. The cabin I rented was about a kilometer out of town, nestled in the woods near the highway. It wasn't totally isolated, but felt like it. The trees surrounding it on 3 sides, and the highway running along the front about 50 meters down the slope. It was a small place. 1 bedroom, an open kitchen and living room area, a bathroom barely bigger than a closet. Old carpet that smelled of mildew, thin curtains that let the morning sun stab straight through, but I didn't care. I set up my folding table with my laptop facing the window so I could watch the trees swaying while I worked. I unpacked the few boxes I brought. My clothes, my dog's food, my camping gear, some books. My dog sniffed around the place like she always did in a new home, cautious but curious. She was a good dog, about 5 years old then, mixed breed, smart, calm, didn't bark much but would growl when she sensed something wasn't right. That always gave me comfort, knowing she'd warn me. The first week went by easily. I'd wake up early to the sound of birds and the wind in the trees, boil water for instant coffee on the old gas stove, sit outside on the steps sipping it while my dog sniffed around the edges of the trees. Sometimes a car or semi would rumble by on the highway below, but otherwise there was only silence. I'd work for a few hours, take her for a walk up and down the road, or along one of the logging trails that led deeper into the woods, then work again in the evening. It felt good, like my brain was breathing again. On the 8th or 9th day I was there, I heard 2 gunshots, loud, echoing off the hills around the valley. I was walking my dog along the logging trail at the time. She flinched, looked back at me, but didn't panic. I didn't think much of it either. It was hunting country. People shot at deer or rabbits or tin cans for fun. When I first moved there, the landlord warned me about stray bullets from drunk hunters and told me to wear orange if I went into the woods. So the gunshots didn't really register. Just another sound of the place. A couple days later, I was outside drinking my morning coffee when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A beat-up old truck came slowly up my driveway, engine rumbling loud in the quiet morning. It was the first time anyone had come up to the cabin. I watched as it parked crooked on the grass. The driver door opened and out stepped this man, probably late 50s, thin but with a sagging belly, gray stubble covering his jaw like rough sandpaper. He wore a dirty baseball cap, jeans stiff with old dirt, and heavy boots. He waved at me to come over. I felt a twist in my gut. I didn't know anyone here. Nobody knew me either. That's how I liked it. But he was waving like we were neighbors. I walked down, my dog staying by my side, her ears forward but tail low. When I got closer, I saw his eyes were small and red-rimmed, and his lips were cracked. He reeked faintly of stale sweat and cigarettes. He told me he was my neighbor from down the road, gesturing somewhere vaguely behind the trees. Said he lived just over there, though in this place that could mean anything from 500 meters to 5 kilometers away. He asked me if I'd heard the gunshots a couple days back. I said yeah, I had. He nodded slowly, looking at the ground like he was thinking hard about something, then told me it was his neighbor taking pot shots at his house over some land dispute. Said it casually, like he was telling me about the weather. I remember thinking how odd it was he came all the way up here just to tell me that. He didn't ask me to be a witness or anything, just asked if I'd heard. Then he changed the subject, asked about my dog's name. She was digging in the dirt near a stump, just sniffing around harmlessly. Suddenly he started scolding her, saying, "Don't do that," in this rough voice. Then he called her over in this sing-song voice, like he was testing her obedience. She walked to him slowly, tail tucked halfway down. He bent down, grabbed her by the scruff and belly, and tried flipping her onto her back like those TV dog trainers do. She yelped. I felt anger surge up so fast it made my chest hurt. I told him to stop, my voice low but hard. He let go and stood up, brushed his hands on his jeans like nothing happened. Then he asked me if I owned any guns. I told him no. My stomach twisted tighter when I said it, instantly regretting it. He smiled, a thin smile that didn't touch his eyes, and said he was a great dog trainer. Then he asked me to come mow his lawn. Said it weird. "Please ensure you bring her," he said, using my dog's name. His voice was so flat and casual, but there was something wrong about it. Like he was repeating a sentence he'd practiced 100 times before. He left soon after, climbing into his truck and driving off down the road in a cloud of dust. I stood there watching the dust settle, feeling this sick, cold feeling spread through my chest. I realized I'd just told a stranger that I was unarmed. He knew I lived alone in a small cabin out of sight from the road, surrounded by woods. I didn't know if his story about the neighbor shooting was true, or if he'd been the one firing those shots at someone else, or if he'd shot someone and was now going around seeing who might have heard. After that, he started showing up more. Sometimes he'd drive by slow and stop at the bottom of my driveway, just sitting there in his truck for a minute before driving off again. Other times he'd pull up and knock on my door, asking why I hadn't come to mow his lawn. I'd made the mistake of giving him my number that first day, thinking it was just a normal neighborly thing. He started calling and texting me, always polite words, but with this unsettling undertone, like he was trying to trap me in the politeness. "Hey there, wondering if you could come mow, please ensure you bring her." Always that line about bringing my dog. It made my skin crawl. I started asking around in town. The owners of the store told me he was trouble. He'd lost his wife, lost his job, drank himself stupid most days. They said everyone in the valley hated him, that he had a temper, that he was dangerous. I felt my chest tighten with dread when they told me that. I thought about how he knew I had no gun, how I lived out of sight, how nobody would hear anything if he came in the night. I started sleeping badly. Every little sound outside made my ears strain. The rustle of dry leaves in the wind sounded like footsteps. The thud of a falling pine cone made me flinch. I moved my laptop table so I could see out the window while working, paranoid he'd be standing out there. Every time I took my dog out to pee at night, I scanned the tree-line with my flashlight, half expecting to see him standing there, watching silently from the shadows. Then one night, around 2 or 3 in the morning, my dog started growling. Deep and low at first, then sharper, louder. I sat up in bed, every nerve in my body screaming awake. The cabin was silent otherwise. No wind, no rain, just my dog's growl vibrating the air. She was staring at the front window. The darkness outside pressed against the glass like a thick wall. I couldn't see anything. I slid out of bed, grabbed the can of bear spray I kept by my side, and the small hunting knife I'd started carrying around the cabin with me. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly hold them. I thought about calling someone, but who? The nearest RCMP detachment was over an hour away. And what would I say? That my dog was growling at nothing? I thought about turning on all the lights, but that would only light me up like a target. Every window in that cabin was uncovered. Anyone standing outside could see exactly where I was. Only the bathroom had no window. I walked there on shaking legs, my dog at my side, still growling in short, sharp bursts. I locked the door and sat down on the toilet lid, knife in one hand, bear spray in the other, my feet ice cold on the cracked linoleum. I sat like that for hours, listening, waiting. Every creak of the old wood felt like footsteps on the porch. Every gust of wind rattling the cabin felt like someone pushing on the walls. At some point I must have fallen asleep sitting there, because I woke up to morning light leaking under the bathroom door. My dog was lying at my feet, ears still perked, but calm. I stepped out into the cabin, everything exactly as it was. The front yard empty, silent except for a crow calling somewhere in the trees. I never felt safe there again. Even in daylight, even with the door locked and the dog at my side, there was always that sick knot in my chest. That feeling that he could come back any moment. That he could be watching from the woods. The store owners told me to be careful. They said he was getting worse, drinking more, losing touch with reality. The next time he came up the driveway, I didn't answer the door. He stood there for almost 10 minutes, knocking softly every 30 seconds. Then he left. My dog stayed pressed against my legs the whole time, quiet but trembling. After that, I started planning to leave. I didn't care where. Anywhere was safer. I packed my things slowly over the next week. But before I could leave, something else happened. The landlords started acting weird. At first they were friendly. Then they started feeding my dog when I wasn't looking. I overheard them talking one morning while they thought I was inside, saying they needed to make themselves the in crowd so that my dog would want to be with them. They already had 3 dogs of their own. The way they spoke about it made my skin crawl, like she was some object they needed to claim. I realized this place was no good. None of it. One morning, after they left for market, I grabbed every single thing I owned. I woke up that morning feeling sore all over. My shoulders ached from the heavy pack I'd carried the day before. The straps had pressed into my collarbones for hours as we climbed up and down the rocky trails. I lay there in my sleeping bag for a while before unzipping it and forcing myself to sit up. Cold air rushed in through the mesh of the tent and chilled my damp shirt. I sat there rubbing my arms, staring at the faint morning light that was turning the dark blue sky to a pale gray. We had set up camp at the bottom of this valley in the Sawtooths. The walls of the valley rose steep and jagged on either side. Sharp rocks and big boulders dotted the slopes, with pine trees growing wherever they could find a crack in the ground to send their roots down. I remembered how tired I was when we reached that spot. My feet were throbbing inside my boots, and my knees felt like they could buckle at any moment. All I wanted was to get my pack off and sit down. We found a flat area near a little stream that cut across the valley floor. The grass there was soft, mixed with patches of dirt and moss. There were scattered rocks and fallen branches, but we cleared enough space for our tents. The stream trickled past with a calming sound, and the air smelled like pine sap, wet earth, and fresh water. All evening I felt peaceful. We boiled some water, cooked our freeze-dried dinner, and sat in silence as the sun went down behind the valley walls. Shadows stretched across the ground, and the cold came quickly once the sunlight disappeared. I pulled on my fleece and sat with my knees tucked up to my chest, feeling the warmth from my body trapped in the folds of my clothes. After we packed up our food and hung it from a tree branch a good distance away, I crawled into my tent. I pulled off my boots and rubbed my sore feet for a while. The soles were covered in dust, and the skin around my heels felt raw. I lay down on my thin foam pad and listened to the breeze moving through the trees. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears until the smallest sounds seem loud. A shifting foot, a zipper pull, the creak of nylon as you roll over in your sleeping bag. At some point in the night, I woke up to pee. I checked my watch. It was close to 2 a.m. The air inside the tent was freezing. My breath made small clouds that disappeared into the darkness. I unzipped the door, slid my legs out, and stood up slowly so I wouldn't trip on the guy lines. The world outside was silent and dark. The moon was somewhere behind the valley walls, hidden from where I stood. I could barely see the outlines of trees against the sky. I walked a few steps away, careful not to step on sharp rocks in my socks, and relieved myself behind a large fallen log. As I stood there, I looked up at the walls on either side of the valley. They rose high into darkness, black shapes against the sky. It felt like standing at the bottom of a giant stone bowl. I remember thinking how helpless a person would be if something came crashing down from those heights. I went back to the tent, zipped it closed, and crawled into my sleeping bag. I curled up on my side, trying to get warm again. My nose was freezing, and I buried it under the edge of the bag. For a while, I just lay there awake, listening to the blood rush in my ears. Slowly, sleep came back to me. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I heard the first sound. It was distant at first, a deep rumble that seemed to come from far up the slope. At first I thought it was thunder. The valley walls could echo like that. But as I woke up more, I realized it wasn't thunder. It was a grinding, crashing sound, like giant stones scraping and smashing against each other. My chest tightened with fear. I could hear the rumble growing louder, and mixed in with it was the sharp cracking of trees snapping and the dull thud of rocks smashing into the ground. I lay there frozen. I could feel the cold of the ground through my pad. My heart was pounding so fast I could hear it in my ears. I thought about unzipping the tent and running out into the darkness. But then what? It was pitch black out there. Even if the rocks came straight toward me, I wouldn't be able to see them. I wouldn't know where they were rolling, bouncing, crashing down. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run to that would be safer. The valley walls were too steep to climb in a panic. Even if I ran to the stream, it wouldn't make a difference. I felt completely helpless. I could hear the boulders getting closer. It sounded like they were smashing down everything in their path. I imagined thick trees splitting in half like twigs, bushes crushed flat, huge rocks rolling and crashing, sending up sprays of dirt and splinters of wood. The whole ground felt like it was vibrating under me. I lay there in the darkness, staring at the roof of my tent, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. I wasn't crying, but my body was reacting to the fear. My mouth felt dry, and my fingers were gripping my sleeping bag, so hard they hurt. I thought about what would happen if the rocks came into camp. There would be no warning, no time to react. One moment I would be lying there, the next I would be gone, crushed under a boulder heavier than a car. My life would just stop. I thought about my family back home. I thought about how they would hear about it. I thought about all the things I still wanted to do. There was nothing I could do. Just wait. Just hope the rocks went somewhere else. Eventually, the crashing and grinding faded away. The valley went silent again. The echoes of the slide bounced around for a while, but slowly it was just quiet. My heart was still hammering, my ears ringing from how hard my blood was pumping. I lay there for a long time, waiting for it to start again. Waiting for another rumble or crashing noise. But it didn't come. The night was still and silent again. My body was so full of fear and tension that I felt like I couldn't move. My legs were stiff, my shoulders sore from how tight I was holding myself. My stomach hurt like I'd been punched. I don't know how long I lay awake after that. Hours maybe. Every time the wind moved through the trees and knocked down a branch, I would flinch and hold my breath, thinking it was starting again. Eventually, my body gave out and I fell into a light, restless sleep. I kept having dreams that rocks were rolling over me, crushing my bones, burying me under dirt and stone. I would wake up sweating, heart racing, then drift off again into another bad dream. When the sun finally started to rise, I felt so tired I could barely open my eyes. The light was dim and gray. I unzipped my tent and crawled out. My knees felt weak and my back was stiff. I stood up slowly and looked around. Everything looked normal. The stream still trickled past, the trees stood tall, the tents around me were still standing. Birds were chirping in the branches overhead. The air smelled fresh and cold. I looked up at the valley walls, scanning them for any sign of the rock slide. I couldn't see anything different. No fresh scars of dirt, no broken trees at the edge of camp. For all I knew, the rocks might have come to a stop a quarter-mile away, or even further. The sound had been so loud, so violent, but out here in the vast emptiness of the mountains, distance can be hard to judge. I walked around camp, stretching my legs and trying to shake off the fear from the night. My stomach was still twisted in knots. I kept thinking about how close it had sounded, how helpless I had felt. It was like lying on train tracks and hearing the rumble of a train coming toward you in the darkness. I kept replaying the moment in my head. The grinding, the crashing, the smashing of trees, the heavy boulders tearing down the mountain in the pitch black. That feeling of not being able to do anything about it stayed with me the whole morning. I made myself a small breakfast, forcing the food down even though my throat felt tight. As we packed up camp and got ready for the day's hike, I kept glancing up at the valley walls. Every time a breeze rustled the trees or a squirrel knocked loose a small stone, my body tensed up. I couldn't stop imagining what would have happened if the rocks had come into camp. There would have been no chance. The idea that I was lying there, asleep in a thin nylon tent, while massive stones rolled down from hundreds of feet above, smashing everything in their path, it made me feel small. Smaller than I ever felt before. Like I was nothing in the eyes of the mountain. Just another speck of life that could be wiped away without a second thought. As we hiked out of the valley that day, I kept looking back over my shoulder at those steep rocky walls. I could see scars on the slopes where older slides had come down, stripping the trees away, leaving nothing but exposed dirt and scattered boulders. They were silent now, unmoving, but I knew that one day, more rocks would fall. Maybe the next night, or the next week, or years later. It was a reminder that out there, in those big mountains, you are never really safe. You are just lucky enough to pass through for a while. We reached the next pass by late afternoon. The climb was steep and brutal, and by the time I dropped my pack at the top, my shoulders felt like they were on fire. I sat there breathing heavily, staring back at the valley we'd come from. The sun was shining bright now, the rocks glittering in the light, and everything looked calm and beautiful from that height. But in my mind, I could still hear the crashing. I could still feel the ground trembling under me. I realized then that the feeling of helplessness from that night would stay with me for a long time. It would come back to me in quiet moments, when I least expected it. That deep understanding that sometimes there is nothing you can do but lie still, hold your breath, and hope the mountain decides to let you live. That night, when we set up camp in a new valley, I lay awake again for a long time before sleep came. I listened to the wind moving through the trees. I listened to the quiet breathing of my friends in their tents nearby. I stared up at the dark outline of the mountains against the sky, and all I could think was, I hope tonight is quiet. I hope the rocks stay where they are. I hope I wake up in the morning to see the sun rising over the peaks and to feel the cold air on my face again. I hope I'm given another day. My family always went camping in the summer when I was growing up. It was like a tradition. We didn't really have money for fancy hotels or flights, so camping was what we did every year without fail. I remember the way my dad would load up the minivan with all our gear. The tents, the sleeping bags, the small propane stove, coolers filled with ice and sandwiches and drinks. The car always smelled like sunscreen and bug spray, and my sister and I would sit in the back seat with our pillows tucked against the windows, half asleep as the sun rose during those long early drives. We had a few favorite spots we rotated through each summer. Virginia Beach was my mom's favorite, mostly because there were showers nearby and grocery stores weren't far. Westmoreland was the worst in my opinion. The ground there was rocky and there were so many bugs, and it always felt hotter there than anywhere else. But Assateague was the place we went most often. There was something about it that my parents loved. Maybe it was the beach so close to the campsites, or the wild ponies roaming around. To me, it always smelled like salt, marsh, and campfire smoke mixed together. That year, I think I was around 8 or 9. We had driven in the early morning. and I remember stopping at a gas station on the way, where my dad let us each get a treat. I picked out a big blue raspberry ring pop, and it turned my tongue so blue that my sister kept making fun of me. I sat in the back seat for the rest of the drive with my mouth sticky from the candy. The windows opened to the warm summer wind that smelled like cut grass and hot pavement. When we arrived, my dad checked us in at the ranger station, got our parking permit, and we found our site. We set up 2 tents like we always did, one for me and my sister, and one for my parents. But that year, for some reason, my mom decided she wanted me to sleep in their tent. I don't remember why exactly. Maybe because I was still pretty little, and sometimes I'd wake up scared in the night. So we set up their tent on one side of the site, just off the small path that led down to the sand dunes, and my sister's tent on the other side near the picnic table. I remember helping my dad pound in the stakes with a big rubber mallet. The air was heavy and humid, and we were sweating in the heat even though it was only morning. When we finished setting up the tents, we walked down to the beach. It wasn't far at all. You could hear the waves from where we were camping, a low rolling crash every few seconds. The sand was white and hot under my feet, and the dunes had tufts of long grass growing out of them that scratched against your ankles when you walked past. That day we spent hours at the beach. I collected shells and dug big holes trying to reach water. My sister laid out in the sun trying to tan, and my dad sat in his fold-up chair reading a paperback Western novel. My mom was sitting under the umbrella, wearing her big straw hat and sunglasses, reading a magazine. Every once in a while she'd call me back to put on more sunscreen because my skin burned so easily. We went back to the campsite in the afternoon when the sun got too strong, and my dad fired up the little propane stove to heat baked beans and cook hot dogs. I remember sitting at the picnic table, legs swinging underneath, because I was too small for my feet to touch the ground properly, eating my hot dog with ketchup and mustard dripping onto my paper plate. The breeze carried the smell of salt water and hot sand, mixed with the smoky scent of other people's campfires nearby. You could hear the rustling of the dune grass and the sound of seagulls calling overhead, and every so often the distant whinny of a pony. That evening, after dinner, we walked down to the beach again. My dad wanted to fish, and my mom walked along the edge of the water with me, letting the waves roll over our feet. The sun was setting, and the sky was all orange and pink, reflecting on the wet sand so it looked like we were walking on fire. My sister stayed back at the campsite reading a book by flashlight in her tent. When the sky turned dark blue and the first stars came out, we went back up the trail to the tents. I remember feeling tired in that deep way only a full day in the sun can make you feel, where your whole body feels heavy and your eyes sting with sleepiness. My mom helped me wash my feet off with a jug of water so I wouldn't get sand in the sleeping bags, and then I crawled into the tent after brushing my teeth at the tap near the bathrooms. Inside the tent it was hot and smelled like plastic and sunscreen. My dad unzipped the mesh window so the breeze could come in. I remember lying on top of my sleeping bag at first, too hot to crawl inside it, listening to the sound of the ocean and the distant whinnies of the ponies out in the dunes. My mom was reading by flashlight, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. My dad fell asleep quickly, snoring softly. I don't know what time it was when I woke up again. It was deep in the night, the kind of night where the air feels cooler and everything is still. The only sounds were the waves rolling in and the rustling of the grass. It was dark inside the tent, but I could see because the moonlight was shining through the thin fabric, turning everything silver blue. I woke up because my mom was sitting up. She wasn't moving, just sitting there in her sleeping bag, her back straight and her hands resting in her lap. Her head was turned toward the side of the tent, and her face looked pale in the moonlight. At first I didn't understand why she was awake, and I blinked a few times, still half asleep, trying to see what she was looking at. Then I saw it. There was a shadow on the side of the tent. It was shaped like a person standing just outside, close enough that the outline was clear. The figure was bent forward slightly, like it was leaning down to look into the tent through the mesh window. I could see long, thin hair hanging down on either side of its head, and the shape of a narrow face with a pointed chin. It looked like an old woman with wiry, tangled hair, just standing there watching us sleep. My heart started beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was frozen, staring at the shadow, and my mouth felt dry. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and goosebumps rose on my arms. My stomach twisted with fear because I didn't understand what I was looking at. It didn't move at all. It just stood there, leaning in close to the tent. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to pull my sleeping bag over my head and hide, but I couldn't move. My body felt like it was made of stone. I tried to breathe quietly, tiny shallow breaths, so whoever was outside wouldn't hear me. My throat felt tight, like I couldn't swallow. The shadow was so still that it didn't look real. But I knew it was there because my mom was staring at it too, not blinking. The longer I stared at it, the more details I saw. The hair looked rough and stringy, sticking out in thin, uneven lines. The head seemed to be moving a little, like it was shifting its weight from one side to the other. My skin prickled all over as my mind tried to make sense of it. It was like being in a nightmare where everything looks wrong and twisted. Then it moved. The head turned slightly, and I saw the silhouette of what looked like a snout. It didn't make sense to me at first. I just kept staring as it shifted its weight again, and the shadow changed shape. That was when the realization came crashing into my brain all at once. It wasn't a woman at all. It was a pony, one of the wild ponies from the island. The long hair I thought I saw was its mane hanging down on either side of its neck. Its head was down because it was grazing, probably sniffing at the grass right near the tent. In the moonlight, with the angle of its head, it looked exactly like an old woman's face with long, stringy hair. But now I could see the ears flicking back and forth, and the way its body shifted as it took a step. I felt the fear drain out of me so fast it left my legs trembling. My mom was still sitting up, staring, but I saw her shoulders drop in relief when she realized the same thing. The pony took another step forward, its hooves thudding softly on the ground, and its shadow moved away from the tent wall. I heard the quiet sound of its breath, deep and huffing, and the faint swish of its tail. Then it was gone. It walked past the tent and down the small path toward the beach. I heard its hooves crunching over the sand and the rustling of the grass as it moved away. The shadow disappeared and the side of the tent was empty again, glowing faintly in the moonlight. My mom lay back down after that, pulling her sleeping bag up around her shoulders. I lay there wide awake for a long time, listening to the sound of the waves and the breeze rustling the dune grass. My heart was still beating fast in my chest, and I couldn't stop thinking about how real that shadow had looked, how close it had felt, like someone was standing right there watching us sleep. I didn't fall asleep again until the sky started to lighten with dawn. When we got up that morning and unzipped the tent, the air was cool and damp with early morning fog. There were hoof prints all around the campsite, leading down the path toward the beach. I followed them with my eyes, seeing where they cut through the sand and disappeared over the dunes. That day we ate cereal with warm milk from the cooler and packed up the tents as the sun rose higher in the sky. My dad complained about how humid it was, and my sister sprayed herself with coconut sunscreen that smelled too sweet. I kept looking down the path toward the beach, thinking about that pony walking alone in the moonlight, silent and ghost-like with its mane blowing in the breeze. Even now, years later, I still think about that night, about how fear can trick your mind into seeing things that aren't really there, how shadows can look like old women and ponies can look like ghosts. But the truth was simple. It was just one of the wild ponies, following its trail to the ocean, probably looking for seagrass to eat or a place to stand and feel the breeze on its face as the waves rolled in. That was all it was. But lying there in the darkness, staring at that shadow, my small body shaking with fear, it felt like something out of a nightmare. And even though I know now what it really was, I can still feel that cold fear crawl up my spine every time I think about it. The way it felt to believe, even just for a few minutes, that something was standing there. I had been planning that camping trip for weeks. I wanted to get away from everything, the noise, the messages, the work emails that never stopped. I picked a valley I found on an old hiking forum, far enough from town that I wouldn't see anyone, but close enough that if I really needed to, I could hike out within a day. There was no cell service anywhere past the last highway pull-off. That was part of the reason I chose it. I wanted silence. I wanted to hear nothing but the wind and the river. That first day I drove along a narrow dirt road that twisted down into the valley. The trailhead parking lot was almost empty except for an old blue Subaru covered in dust. I parked, grabbed my day pack, and started walking up one of the steeper trails that wound along the river's edge. I didn't realize how late it was getting until I noticed the shadows getting long and cold. I knew I still needed to find a place to camp before it got fully dark. As I headed back down the trail, thinking about just setting up near my truck, I saw a man standing off to the side, leaning on a walking stick. He was thin, wearing a brown jacket and worn jeans, and had a soft look in his eyes. He looked like he belonged there, like he had spent his whole life walking those trails. He asked if I was looking for a camping spot, and when I said yes, he told me he knew a place that wasn't far. He pointed down a small path I hadn't noticed before. It led closer to the road and the river, but was hidden by the way the land dipped down behind a thick stand of trees. I thanked him, feeling lucky to have met a local who knew the land, and headed that way. By the time I got there, the sky was almost black. I could hear the river rushing just out of sight, and the air smelled of wet moss and pine needles. I didn't bother setting up my tent. I was tired, and the sky was clear. Instead, I built a small fire in a bare patch of dirt, cracked open one of my beers, and sat on my camp chair. I pulled out my friend's comedy podcast from my phone. I had downloaded a few episodes before I left town. The fire crackled softly, and the glow flickered against the branches above me. I laughed out loud a few times at the jokes, not caring if I sounded stupid alone in the woods. The sound of my laughter mixed with the podcast, and the occasional pop of burning pine sap. I felt visible and loud. The firelight probably lit me up like a beacon if anyone was out there in the dark. When the podcast ended, I turned off my phone and let the silence settle back in. It was late, and the air had turned sharp and cold. I climbed into the back of my truck and pulled the topper shut. I tucked myself between my gear bags and used my folded jacket as a pillow. For a while, I lay awake listening to the river and the last cracks of cooling coals in the fire pit. I thought about how quiet it was and about how far I was from anyone I knew, but I wasn't scared then. I liked the feeling of being alone in a place that felt so untouched. When the sun finally rose, I woke up with a stiff neck from sleeping in the truck. My legs felt cramped from the awkward position I'd curled into during the night. The light poured into the valley, lighting up the river like a strip of silver. I pushed open the back of the topper, letting the cold morning air hit my face. I stretched, took a leak on a nearby tree, and pulled my small pan and camping stove from my bag. I built up the fire again, feeding it with dead pine needles and thin branches until the flames licked up strong enough to catch bigger sticks. I cracked another beer, just because I could. I was free out there. There was no one to judge me for drinking before breakfast, no meetings to prepare for, no notifications to answer. I sat on the dirt with my back against the truck tire, watching the fire and sipping the cold beer as I waited for my pan to heat up so I could fry some eggs and sausage. I felt relaxed. I was thinking about whether to stay another day or maybe drive further up into the mountains later that afternoon. That's when I saw him. At first I thought it was an animal moving between the trees at the edge of my camp, but then I saw his shape. A man, standing just inside the line where the dark trunks of pine met the brighter clearing where I was sitting. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. My first thought was that it was the same local guy from the trail last night. Maybe he wanted to check in on me. I raised my hand in a lazy wave, but he didn't wave back. He just kept standing there, facing my direction, but not looking directly at me. As he stepped closer, I saw that he was a different man. His beard was long, gray and brown, knotted and stained in places like he had been eating or sleeping in the dirt for weeks. His clothes were torn, and all over them were tied hundreds of plastic grocery bags. Some white, some yellowed, some torn and hanging in thin strips. They fluttered slightly with every movement he made, making a faint rustling sound like dry leaves in the wind. He moved towards the fire, not directly towards me, but along the edge of my camp. He never met my eyes, just kept his head tilted down. His hair was long, stuck to his neck in greasy clumps. His pants were sagging low enough that I could see the tops of his dirty thighs where the fabric had worn through. He smelled bad. Even from where I sat, the smell hit me, old sweat, rotten dirt, something sour I couldn't place. My stomach turned slightly, but I tried to stay calm. I said out loud, just to break the tension, "Nice day, huh?" He didn't say anything. He didn't even nod. He shuffled around the outside of my camp, his feet dragging slowly through the pine needles. The plastic bags tied all over him crinkled with each step. I watched the way his eyes stayed focused on the ground, never once flicking up to meet mine. My chest felt tight and uncomfortable. I tried again, thinking maybe he was hungry. "You want some breakfast?" I asked. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet morning. Still nothing from him. He just kept pacing in a slow arc around my camp. He moved like he was floating just above the dirt, like his feet barely carried his weight. I realized I was holding my breath. I tried once more, raising the beer slightly. "You want a beer?" He stopped then, but didn't turn around to face me. He just stood there, his back to me, head down, arms limp at his sides with those hundreds of plastic bags fluttering around him like dying birds. The silence was worse than if he'd screamed at me. I felt the hair rise on my arms. It was like he didn't see me at all, like I was invisible, or like he did see me but didn't care that I was there. I sat there for a minute, thinking about what to do. My truck keys were in my pocket. My bear spray was next to my cooking gear, and my buck knife was strapped to my belt. I felt the handle of the knife with my thumb, then reached down and grabbed the bear spray, pulling it up onto my lap. I held it with the nozzle pointed away from me, just in case. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. He shifted his feet a little, but didn't turn around. The way he stood there, with his back to me, just slightly moving side to side, made something primal in me panic. It felt wrong, like something that wasn't supposed to be there. My mouth felt dry and I swallowed hard, tasting the stale beer and morning breath in my mouth. I stood up slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. I felt my legs shaking a little as I rose. I took a step towards him, my boots crunching on the dirt and broken pine cones. The bear spray felt small in my hand. I raised it slightly, thumb resting against the trigger. "Motherfucker, you are either going to acknowledge me or leave immediately," I said, my voice low but shaking. He didn't move, didn't even flinch. I felt a sharp wave of fear cut through my stomach. I took another step forward, lifting the bear spray up so the nozzle was pointed right at his head. That made him react. He hunched his shoulders, almost like he was curling into himself, and then started shuffling away. He didn't turn to look at me. He didn't say anything. He just dragged his feet through the needles and dirt, plastic bags brushing against each other with that dry crinkling sound, and walked back into the trees. I watched until I couldn't see him anymore. Even then, I listened hard, trying to hear if he was still close by. My hands were shaking. My breath came out in short, fast bursts. The morning didn't feel calm anymore. The birds had gone quiet. The fire crackled, but it felt like it was too loud, too obvious. I felt exposed, like I was standing there naked in the middle of the woods. I didn't waste time after that. I kicked dirt over the fire until it was completely out, threw my pan and stove into the back of my truck, and slammed the topper shut. My heart was still pounding as I climbed into the driver's seat. I kept looking around, scanning the tree line for any glimpse of plastic bags or a hunched figure watching me. My keys fumbled in my hands as I jammed them into the ignition. The tires spat up loose dirt and small rocks as I pulled out of there fast. I didn't care about breakfast anymore. My mouth felt sour and empty. As I drove up the dirt road, bouncing over roots and potholes, I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see him there standing in the middle of the road, plastic bags fluttering in the morning breeze. When I finally reached the main road and started driving back towards town, I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles had gone white. The sun was shining bright over the hills. The sky was perfectly blue, but I felt like I had just crawled out of a dark hole. I couldn't stop thinking about how quiet he was, how he hadn't acknowledged me at all, how he had just stood there moving side to side like a broken scarecrow. As I got further away from the valley, the cell signal bars popped back up on my phone screen. I didn't check my messages. I didn't want to talk to anyone yet. My mind kept replaying the way he had appeared at the edge of my camp, silent and empty, and the way he had just shuffled away when I threatened him with the bear spray. I thought about how loud I had been the night before, laughing, playing podcasts, the fire lighting me up for anyone to see. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been there all night. I woke up at around 5 in the morning. The sky was still dark, and the sun hadn't come up yet. I lay there in bed for a while, just listening to the ceiling fan moving above me. It was making that quiet whirring sound that fans make, like a soft hum in the quiet. My phone was next to me, plugged in, and I checked it to see the time. It was 5:07 a.m. I had this routine every Saturday where I would wake up early and go for a walk. I lived in a small town, but my house was right on the edge, so behind it there were these trails that led out to the fields and the woods beyond. I liked going out there before anyone else was awake, before the sun even came up, when everything felt quiet and empty and my head felt clear. I got up and went to the bathroom. I washed my face with cold water to wake myself up. The water felt freezing against my skin and made me shiver a little. I brushed my teeth and then put on my old sweatpants and a gray hoodie. I pulled on my socks and tied up my worn-out walking shoes. They were black and had scuff marks on the sides from walking those same trails every week. I didn't bother eating anything. I wasn't hungry yet. I grabbed my phone and my house keys, locked the front door behind me, and stepped out into the early morning darkness. The air was cool but not freezing, just cool enough that my breath showed faintly in the glow of the street lamp near my house. Everything was quiet. The houses around me were all dark. No cars driving by. No people walking dogs. Nothing. I walked down my driveway and out onto the road. The road was cracked in some places, with grass poking through here and there along the edges. I walked along it for a while until I reached the small dirt path that led off into the fields behind the houses. I turned onto it. At first, the path was lined with fences on either side, separating the backyards of the houses. After a few minutes, the fences ended, and the path opened up to a wide stretch of grass that was slightly wet with dew. The grass came up to my ankles in some places, and my shoes were quickly soaked through. I didn't mind. I kept walking. As I walked further, I could see the outline of the tree line up ahead. The woods started about half a mile past the houses. The trees looked black against the slightly lighter sky. There was still no sun, but the sky was turning from pitch black to dark blue, with a bit of gray in it. I reached the edge of the woods and paused for a moment. I always liked that feeling, standing there at the edge, looking into the darkness between the trees. There was a path that went through the woods. It wasn't an official trail, just a dirt path that people had made by walking it for years. I stepped onto it. Inside the woods, it was darker than out in the open. The trees blocked the sky. I could hear the quiet rustle of leaves above me as a breeze moved through. The ground was soft under my shoes, with patches of mud here and there. I walked slowly, just enjoying the quiet. Every few steps I could hear twigs snapping under my feet. I walked for a long time. I didn't check my phone. I didn't want to know what time it was. I just wanted to walk and feel like I was the only person awake in the whole town. After a while, I noticed the sky was getting a little brighter through the trees. There was that soft early morning light coming in, not enough to fully see everything, but enough to see outlines clearer. I kept walking until I reached the small clearing deep in the woods. It was an open space surrounded by tall trees, and the grass there was shorter. I always stopped here to sit for a while before heading back. I stepped into the clearing and stood there for a moment, looking around. The air smelled like wet grass and dirt. I walked over to a fallen tree at the edge of the clearing and sat down on it. The wood was damp and cold under me, but I didn't care. I just sat there, breathing slowly, looking out across the clearing. As I was sitting there, I noticed something strange. On the far side of the clearing, near the trees, there was this shape on the ground. At first, I thought it was just a log or a big rock. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized it was neither of those. It looked like a bag, a big duffel bag, or maybe a tarp folded up. I couldn't really tell from where I was sitting. I didn't move for a while. I just sat there staring at it. I didn't feel scared at that point, just curious. I kept thinking about what it could be. Maybe someone left their camping gear here. Maybe it was trash someone dumped. People dump trash in these woods all the time. Old TVs, broken chairs, rotting couches. I'd seen it before. After sitting there for a few more minutes, I stood up. I wanted to go see what it was. I stepped off the log and walked slowly across the clearing. The grass brushed against my shins. The ground was soft and squished under my steps. As I got closer to the thing, I felt my chest tighten a little. I didn't know why. I kept telling myself it was just trash. When I reached it, I stopped. It was a tarp, but it wasn't folded up. It was wrapped around something. I could see that it was tied with some kind of rope. The tarp was green and dirty, covered in mud in some places. The rope was wrapped around it a few times and tied off at the top. I just stood there looking at it. I felt this weird cold feeling in my stomach, like when you realize you left the stove on at home, or when you lose your wallet in public. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to be near it. I took a small step back, just staring at it. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing. I kept thinking maybe it was just someone's trash. But who would wrap trash up like that? My mouth felt dry. My hands felt cold, even though they were in the pocket of my hoodie. I stood there for a while, staring at it, feeling that cold knot in my stomach grow tighter. My ears felt hot. I didn't hear anything around me. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my own breathing, fast and shaky. After what felt like forever, I turned around and started walking back towards the path. I didn't run. I didn't want to run. I felt like if I started running, whatever was inside that tarp would somehow know, like it would somehow come after me. I know that doesn't make sense, but that's how it felt. I walked fast, keeping my eyes on the ground in front of me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt sweat on my back even though the air was cold. I walked and walked, not looking back. The trees passed by me on either side. The ground felt uneven, and I almost tripped a couple of times. When I finally reached the edge of the woods, I felt like I could breathe again. I stepped out into the open field and kept walking. The sky was brighter now, that light blue morning sky with thin clouds stretched across it. I didn't stop. I just kept walking all the way back down the path until I reached the cracked road again. I walked home quickly. My shoes were covered in mud. My socks were wet, and I could feel small pieces of grit inside them, rubbing against my skin. When I reached my house, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. I locked it behind me and leaned back against it for a moment, closing my eyes. My house felt warm and quiet. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the glass. I drank it all in one go and set it down on the counter. I took off my muddy shoes and socks and left them by the door. My feet were red and cold against the tile floor. I walked to the living room and sat down on the couch. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat there, staring at the floor, thinking about that tarp in the woods. I thought about calling the police. But what would I say? That I saw a tarp in the woods? They would probably just think it was trash. Maybe it was. But I couldn't get that cold feeling out of my stomach. I couldn't stop thinking about what could be inside it. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the floor, feeling that cold knot in my stomach tighten every time I thought about it. After a while, I stood up. I went to the bathroom and turned on the shower. The water steamed up the room quickly. I stepped in and stood there under the hot water, feeling it run over my head and down my back. My feet felt numb against the shower floor. I just stood there, not washing, just standing there with my eyes closed. When I got out, I felt a little better. My skin was warm and my hands had stopped shaking. I wrapped a towel around myself and walked back to my bedroom. I put on clean clothes and lay down on my bed. I didn't go back to sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me, thinking about the tarp in the woods. I kept thinking that maybe I should go back and check. Maybe I should just open it and see. But every time I thought about it, that cold knot in my stomach twisted tighter, and I felt sick. As the sun rose higher in the sky and light filled my room, I knew I wasn't going back there today. Or maybe ever. I didn't want to know what was inside. I didn't want to find out. The next day, I woke up early again. I thought about going for my walk, but I couldn't. I stayed in bed for a long time, just listening to the morning sounds outside. Birds, a car starting down the street, someone's dog barking. Normal sounds. I got up eventually and made myself breakfast. Toast and eggs. I ate it slowly, staring at my plate, thinking about that tarp. The image of it was burned into my mind, green and dirty with rope wrapped around it, lying there in the dim light at the edge of the clearing. Later that day, I drove out to the grocery store. As I was driving back home, I passed by the small dirt parking lot near the trailhead where people parked to walk the woods trails. There was a police car parked there. 2 officers were standing near the trail entrance, talking to each other. My chest tightened as I drove by. I kept driving, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight. When I got home, I sat in my car for a while, staring at the dashboard, my heart pounding in my chest. I never found out what was in that tarp. I never read about it in the paper. I never heard anyone talk about it. I never really liked going out to the lake house alone. It sat at the very end of a long dirt road, hidden behind tall pine trees that blocked out most of the sky. The drive there always felt endless. I would leave the highway and drive for half an hour on winding roads, then turn off onto the bumpy dirt track that snaked through the woods. Every time, I'd feel my chest tighten as soon as I left the last paved road behind. There was something about being so far out, no neighbors for miles, just trees pressing in from all sides, that made me feel small and exposed. That summer, my uncle asked me to check on the house while he was overseas. He told me to spend a few days there, make sure everything was okay, run the water, clear out any mice or bugs that might have taken up space in the months it had sat empty. I didn't want to say no. He'd helped me out with money for college before, and it felt wrong to refuse such a simple favor. I drove up on a Wednesday morning. It was hot out. The sun baked the top of my car as I wound through the trees. The dirt road was dry, with dust rising behind me in a thick cloud. I kept the windows rolled up. Every time I'd crack one open, the dust would drift inside, covering the dashboard in a thin brown layer. When I finally pulled up in front of the house, I turned off the car and just sat there for a moment. The woods were silent except for the hum of insects. The heat pressed down heavy, making the air shimmer just above the gravel driveway. The house looked exactly the same as always. Gray wooden siding, dark green trim around the windows, a small porch sagging a little in the middle. There was an old rocking chair on the porch that had been there since I was a kid. It never rocked unless there was a breeze, but still, every time I saw it, my stomach would twist, like it was waiting for someone to come sit in it. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, slung it over my shoulder, and went up the 3 steps to the front door. The lock was stiff from months without use. I had to push my shoulder into the door to get it to open. Inside, the air smelled stale and faintly sour, like old wood and mouse droppings. I set my bag down and walked through the main room, opening every window I could find to let fresh air in. By the time I finished unpacking groceries and basic supplies, the sun was high and the living room felt warm. I turned on the ceiling fans and wiped down the kitchen counters. There were a few dead flies in the sink. I rinsed them down the drain and ran the water until it stopped sputtering. The afternoon passed slowly. I sat on the couch for a while, scrolling through my phone, but there was no signal out there. I tried connecting to the Wi-Fi, but it wasn't working. My uncle always shut off the internet when he left for long trips. I watched some downloaded videos on my phone, ate a sandwich, and lay back staring up at the ceiling fan spinning lazily. Outside, the shadows grew longer as the sun dipped behind the trees. I decided to go for a walk before it got dark. There was an old logging trail that ran past the back of the house. It curved through the woods for a couple of miles before looping back to the main road. I grabbed my water bottle and headed out. The woods felt heavy with heat. The dirt under my feet was dry and dusty. Every step kicked up a little cloud. The trees were thick here, mostly pine and fir, their branches dark and tangled overhead. I walked slowly, listening to the hum of insects, the occasional chirp of a bird, the rustle of something small moving through dead pine needles. It felt peaceful, but also eerie, like the forest was holding its breath. After about 20 minutes, I turned around and headed back. The sun was setting, and long shadows fell across the path, stretching out in front of me like fingers. I could see the back of the house through the trees when I heard it. A low cracking sound, like a branch breaking under something heavy. I stopped walking and listened. The woods went silent. No birds. No insects, just the faint creak of trees swaying against each other. I looked around but saw nothing, just rows of dark trunks fading into the dim light. I told myself it was probably a deer or a raccoon. There were lots of animals out here, but I felt that old tightness in my chest again, the same feeling I got driving down the dirt road. I forced myself to keep walking, focusing on the house ahead of me. When I got back inside, I locked the door behind me and closed all the windows except one in the kitchen for ventilation. The air felt cooler now that the sun was down. I made myself some instant noodles, sat at the kitchen table, and ate slowly, listening to the quiet. There was a clock on the wall that ticked loudly in the silence. Each tick sounded sharp, echoing off the walls. After dinner, I cleaned up and got ready for bed. I didn't want to stay up late without internet or TV. Lying in bed, I could hear the woods outside, the creaking of trees, the occasional thump of something falling to the forest floor. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but my mind kept drifting back to that cracking sound on the trail. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a noise outside. It was faint at first, a soft scraping sound, like something dragging across the porch. I lay still listening. The noise came again, a little louder this time. A thump, then another scrape. My chest felt tight. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I forced myself to sit up and listen carefully. The scraping stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear anything in the silence. After a few minutes, I got out of bed and walked to the window. I pulled the curtain back just enough to peek out. The porch was empty. The rocking chair sat still in the moonlight. I let out a shaky breath and went to the front door. I pressed my ear against it, but heard nothing. I flipped on the porch light, but it only illuminated a small circle in front of the house. Everything beyond that was pitch black. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I lay in bed listening for any other noises. My mind kept playing tricks on me. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every rustle outside sounded like someone moving through the trees. When the first light of dawn finally came through the window, I felt exhausted. I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the woods. The morning was quiet and still. The fear I'd felt during the night seemed foolish now. In the daylight, everything looked normal again. I spent the morning cleaning out the closets, sweeping the floors, and wiping down the windows. Around noon, I ate lunch on the porch. The rocking chair sat to my left, unmoving. I kept glancing at it, half expecting it to start rocking on its own, even though I knew it wouldn't. That afternoon, I decided to check the shed behind the house. My uncle kept tools and old supplies in there, and he'd asked me to make sure nothing had been damaged by animals or weather. I grabbed the spare key from the kitchen drawer and walked out back. The shed was about 50 feet from the house, partially hidden by overgrown blackberry bushes. I pushed through them, careful not to catch my arms on the thorns. The padlock was stiff with rust. It took a few tries to get the key to turn. When I pulled the door open, the smell hit me immediately. Damp wood, mildew, and something else, something sharp and sour. I stepped inside and looked around. Old gardening tools lined the walls. Bags of fertilizer sat in a neat stack on the floor. There was a rolled-up tarp in the corner. Everything looked normal, but the smell was so strong it made my eyes water. I looked around for the source and saw a dark stain on the wooden floor near the back wall. I crouched down to look closer. The stain was black and sticky looking, with flies crawling across it. I felt my stomach clench. At first, I thought maybe a raccoon had gotten in and died, but I couldn't see any fur or bones, just the stain. I stood up quickly and backed out of the shed, closing the door behind me. I locked it and walked back to the house, wiping my hands on my jeans to get rid of the smell. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about the stain in the shed, about what could have caused it. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock in the kitchen. At some point, I drifted off. I woke up to another noise outside. This time it was a loud thump, followed by a scraping sound along the siding of the house. My whole body tensed. I lay still, breathing shallow, listening. Another thump, closer this time. Then silence. I got out of bed and grabbed the heavy flashlight from the nightstand. I walked quietly to the kitchen window and looked out. The porch was empty again, but the light was off. I was sure I'd left it on. My hand shook as I turned the flashlight on and stepped toward the front door. I pressed my ear against it, listening. Nothing. Slowly, I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The night air was cold on my face. I stepped out onto the porch and shone the flashlight around. The beam cut through the darkness, lighting up the trees at the edge of the yard. I moved the light along the ground, across the porch, to the rocking chair. My breath caught in my throat. There were muddy footprints on the porch, leading up to the chair, and then away again toward the side of the house. They were large prints, too big to be mine, spaced far apart, like someone had been walking with long strides. My chest tightened as I followed them with the light. They disappeared around the corner of the house. I wanted to go back inside, lock the door, and wait for morning, but something made me keep going. I stepped off the porch, my bare feet cold on the damp ground, and followed the footprints around the side of the house. The flashlight flickered slightly as I moved. When I reached the back corner of the house, I froze. The footprints led straight to the shed. The door was slightly open, the padlock hanging down useless on its latch. I shone the light on the door, half expecting it to slam shut in front of me, but it didn't move. I stepped closer, my heart pounding so hard it felt like my chest might burst. I pushed the door open with the tip of the flashlight and shone the beam inside.